Stephen, the computer's not. The computer's not. No, I just.
Currently are you're to. You just tested it.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Can you hear us okay, Representative? We're just testing it.
I can hear you fine.
Great, thank you. Okay, we were gonna go back on mute until we launch the meeting in a minute or two. We're just gonna let remote panelists up for a minute or two until we get started.
Okay, sounds good. Hi, Ruth. Yeah, I'm here.
Representative Dunn, if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Yes, I am. I was just going to do that. Thank you, Krista. Appreciate that. So we'll call the DCYF Oversight Board meeting of December 11th, 2023 to order. And please excuse my voice. I'm feeling fine. I just seem to have a case of laryngitis, but I seem to get that from time to time. Sharonda, are you on?
I am. Good afternoon, Representative Dent and other panel members.
Do you have any remarks you'd like to make?
I'd just like to say welcome to everyone. It's good to be back in motion together with all of the panel members. We've got some new panel members joining, and me and you will be relinquishing our seats today. So I'm looking forward to new leadership. I wanted to welcome those that are attending the meeting today and just wishing everyone the best as we resume our duties together, and looking forward to new learning and growing with one another.
Thank you, Sharonda. And I would like to thank you for your hard work from the past. Actually, I've been doing this for 3 years now, and it's been a great time working with you, and I've truly enjoyed my time that I've spent working with you as closely as we have. I'd like to thank our staff, Krista and Nicholas. They're outstanding. I don't know where we could find better staff. They've always been responsive, and they're ready to do what we need to do, and keeping in mind that it's about the kids and all we can do for the kids. For all the board members, thank you. thank you for your patience with me, especially today as I struggle through not being able to talk as well as I'd like. I was telling Chris earlier, a politician is really at a disadvantage when he can't talk. So I could go on forever, but I won't today. And I would like to welcome Danielle Johnson as our newest board member, filling the spot that Charles Leffler had previously. So Danielle, welcome. Welcome to the board of the Oversight Board. We're glad you're here, and we're all here to help and answer any questions that you might have. So, and thank you for your willingness to serve. This is a hard job. So Krista, if you could call the attendance.
Board members, please just unmute and let me know you're present when I call your name. Katie Byron.
Present.
Thank you. Justice Bobby Bridge.
Present.
Okay. Ben DeHaan.
Present.
Thank you. Representative Tom Dent.
I'm here.
Sydney Forrester. Danielle Johnson.
Present.
Ruth Kagi.
Present.
Dr. Diane Levy. I know she said she might be a little bit late, so we will check in with her in a little bit. Lois Martin. Shonda Slevenoff.
Present.
Representative Tana Sen. Senator Judy Warnick.
Present.
Senator Claire Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. And just so the board knows that Assistant Attorney General Kristen Lanson is in the room, as well as, did you want to introduce your colleague?
Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all. I just wanted to quickly introduce my colleague, Patrick Myers. He's a new AAG in our office, and you may see his face once in a while. We are fully staffed and now have backup if something happens and need another head or body to assist. So just want to welcome Patrick. He's here to meet everybody and learn about this board. So thank you for having us, and nice to see everybody.
Thank you. And with the roll call vote, 9 members are present, which reaches quorum. And Lois, are you in attendance? Sorry, I just want to make sure we record this.
Yes.
Thank you, Lois.
So we have 10 members in attendance.
Yes.
Okay, and how many members do we have in field positions at this present time, Krista?
We have 12 voting member positions filled, and we have the non-voting member role, which is the Sydney Forrester's role, the governor's policy advisor, and the rest of the positions on the board are currently empty, which would be an additional 8.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much. So we have our minutes from the last meeting, from November 17th meeting of 2022. Would perhaps, if they're not too long, Krista, you could read the minutes so could refresh everybody what we'll approve.
Yes. The last time the Oversight Board met was November 17th, 2022. The meeting was called to order at 10 a.m. Instead of 9:30 a.m. due to an initial lack of quorum. Co-chair Representative Dent started the meeting, and roll call of DCYF Oversight Board members was taken. The October 20th, 2022 minutes were approved. The first agenda item was the final legislative report review. Krista Johnson reviewed the final draft of the DCYF Oversight Legislative Report with board members. The second agenda item was DCYF State Auditor Findings Q&A with Secretary Ross Hunter. Secretary Ross Hunter answered questions from the board focusing on the state auditor's report findings regarding the child care and development funds administered by DCYF. The third agenda item was co-chair elections. Representative Dent proposed to delay the co-chair elections until April 2023 to allow time for the office of the governor to elect new members. Justice Bobby Bridge made a motion to approve this proposition, and Ruth Kagi seconded the motion. All board members present voted aye on the matter. And the final agenda item for the board was the final legislative report review continued. Krista Johnson completed the review of the DCYF Oversight Board legislative report. Ruth made a motion to approve the report for submission with the edits given throughout the review process. Justice Bobby Bridge seconded the motion. All board members present voted aye on the matter. We then have summarized public comment, both those submitted in writing and those provided live during the meeting that are available for review in the notes as well as on the recording posted on the board's website. And the meeting was adjourned at 1:30 p.m. on Thursday, November 17th, 2022.
Thank you, Krista. Any of the board members have any additions, corrections to the minutes as read? If not, then the meetings can stand as read. Thank you very much. So I'd like to, at this time, open the, so we should go through this a little bit. Krista, would you like to explain how the co-chair process works and where the two co-chairs come from?
Happy to. Yeah, we have, so as the most know, the board has two co-chairs. One's a legislative member on the board and one is a community co-chair representative. The process is as follows, where an individual board member can make a motion to nominate a candidate that then needs to be seconded by another member. And then it can be open for discussion about the qualifications of that individual for the position. At that point, the board can call for a vote. And then given the members in attendance, since we have currently 10 board members present, for an individual to be elected into the position, they must have the majority of votes in support of that individual for those members present. That was a little complicated, but with 10 members present, that means we must have 6 votes in favor of a candidate for them to then be elected into that role. So we would, traditionally we started with the legislative co-chair role. The one caveat around that, which is in the board's bylaws, is that the legislative member must switch between the two caucuses for every 2-year term. We had Representative Tana Sen and the Democratic caucus serve from 2018 to 2020. And then we've had Representative Dent from the Republican caucus serve for the next term a little bit longer because we've had elections postponed until this point. So the next legislative co-chair would be from the Democratic caucus again, which is either Senator Claire Wilson or Representative Tana Sen as well. So with that, I would open it to the board if anyone would like to make a motion, or hand it back to you, Representative Dent, if you want to take the lead on this for the
Yes, thank
legislative.
you, Krista. Yes, Ruth has a question. There you are. Oh, no. Oh, you're on mute, Ruth. You're on mute.
I would like to nominate Senator Claire Wilson to be co-chair of the Oversight Board. Claire has represented the 30th district in the legislature since 2018, and she has chaired the Human Services Committee and is also vice president of the Early Learning and K-12 Committee, which she provides the lead on early learning. And I looked back at some of the things Claire brings to this position, and she really is so well versed in the issues that the Oversight Board is focused on. She spent 25 years as an administrator for early learning and family involvement for the Puget Sound ESD, administering ECAP and Head Start programs. She taught pregnant and parenting teens in public high school, and she was program director of a WIC program in rural Montana. And she also was a school board member for Federal Way for 8 years. And in her role in the legislature, she not only has been prime sponsor of the Fair Start for Kids Act and for many bills dealing with child welfare and early learning, she also is at the forefront of juvenile justice reform. So I think she's extraordinarily well qualified to serve as our co-chair, and I'm very happy to nominate her.
Thank you, Ruth. If it's okay with you, I will open nominations for the legislative co-chair at this time. Just to be on the so we do this correctly. Would you just like to read?
I have to give the same speech again?
No, just nominate her. That's all.
I nominate Claire Wilson. My apologies, Representative Dent.
No worries. Thank you very much. Are there any other nominations for the legislative co-chair role? Are there any more nominations for the co-chair, legislative co-chair role? Are there any more nominations for the legislative co-chair role? Hearing none, nominations shall close for the legislative co-chair. And we shall elect Senator Wilson by acclamation. Congratulations, Senator. I know you're going to be outstanding in this role. Thank you. Now I'd like to open the nominations for the community co-chair role. Nominations are now open. Senator Warnick has her hand up.
Thank you, Representative Dent. And I haven't talked to this person, so I don't know a lot about him, but I would like to nominate Ben DeHaan. You know, he has been a true stalwart for our board as long as I've been on it. You know, the child welfare subject matter expert. I think we really need that in this role. And so I offer Ben DeHaan as co-chair.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any other nominations for co-chair, for the community co-chair role? Bobby, Rich?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Diane Levy. I don't think she's in yet today, but I think she adds a unique, well, she too has been a stalwart attender and member and brings a unique voice, I think, that that we need in our deliberations. She is a physician, working experience with these populations of kids. She's from the east side of the state, which is also something which Representative Dent we value. And anyway, I think she has qualifications for this position, and I'm pleased to nominate her.
So board members,
she's here now.
we can do it. You can do it after. Okay. I just wanted to remind the board members, we need to go through the official process of a motion being made to nominate a candidate and then seconded for us to do this officially. So unfortunately, we might have to back up a little bit with Senator Wilson as well. So sorry to intervene. Just want to make sure that we cross our T's and dot our I's as well. But Diane is present, has joined us as well.
So we need a second. Let's slow down. We need a second for Ben DeHaan.
I second.
Was that you, Sharonda?
It was, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Okay. Did you second his nomination?
I did.
Thank you very much. And now we'll need a second for Dr. Levy.
I second the motion.
Okay. It's been. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, we'll close the nominations for the community co-chair. And I guess now we have an election to conduct. So we can do this by voice vote. Krista,
What we could do is we can open it for further discussion if there's anyone, either the candidates themselves that wish to speak up, or if any other members want to speak on behalf of those two nominations, and then we can hold a vote for each candidate.
sounds good. So Ben was nominated first. Ben, would you have any comments?
Well, it is a little awkward, but I would definitely support Dr. Levy's candidacy for the job. I don't really want to compete with her. I would be very pleased to have her as the co-chair.
Wow, that's quite an endorsement, Dr. Levy. Do you have any comments, Dr. Levy?
I was just going to say ditto about Ben's.
Oh, no.
Just say thank you, Dr. Levy.
Thank you. I appreciate it, but I agree. I think Ben would do a great job too. So, yeah, a little awkward. Yes.
Well, I'll give the two of you a chance. Does either one of you like to remove your name from consideration?
I would do that. I'd remove myself from consideration.
Okay, thank you, Ben. So,
Lois has her hand up.
oh, she does. Lois?
I do, because I just want to express I'm a little concerned about the process, and that first we're supposed to have the nominations and then vote on those names. There wasn't a second for Senator Wilson, nor did we do a formal vote. So I just wanted to point out the process piece of that. And even though I know Ben has withdrawn his name, technically what we should have done is voted on those nominations as opposed to what we're doing now. If I'm wrong, Krista, correct me, but I believe that is how it was handled last time.
I'm actually gonna let Assistant Attorney General Kristen Lamson jump in here.
Thank you, Lois, for your comments. So Krista did flag, we will go back and redo Senator Wilson's nomination. We did only get one motion, and we need to get that seconded and then have an actual vote. So we will circle back to that after we finish this community chair, co-chair piece. As far as the nominations, it is quite normal under Robert's Rules of Order to have motions and then open it for discussion before voting. And certainly in an election, having the candidates themselves say yes to the nomination is appropriate or no to the nomination is appropriate. So from the community co-chair piece, I believe where we're at right now is that there's been two motions that have both been seconded to nominate two members for the community co-chair. Ben DeHaan has said that he would remove himself from consideration. So right now, what we need to do is have a vote on the nomination of Dr. Diane Levy. And once we conclude that vote, we could go back and correct the procedural issues for the legislative co-chair, Senator Wilson. Does anybody have any questions, or is that clear what we need to go through? Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out, Lois. I appreciate it.
And thank you. You know, I knew that, and I let that slip by. My apologies. So we will vote now on the community co-chair rule. We'll vote first for Dr. Levy. If you're in favor of Dr. Levy being the legislative or the community co-chair role, please raise your hand. Thank you. I counted 8 votes. That's it. And Ben DeHaan has removed his name. We don't need to vote for him. Is that correct, Kristen?
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, congratulations, Dr. Levy. You are now the new legislative co-chair. And we shall back up to the community co-chair. I don't try not to put you in the legislature yet. So we'll back up to the legislative co-chair. We had received a nomination for Senator Wilson to be the legislative co-chair, but I neglected, as my oversight, to ask for a second. We need a second.
I would second.
Thank you, Senator Warren. It's been moved and seconded to elect Senator Wilson as the legislative co-chair. Are there any more nominations for the legislative co-chair position? Are there any more nominations for the legislative co-chair position? Are there any more nominations for the legislative co-chair position? Hearing none. All in favor of Senator Wilson as the legislative co-chair, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. I lost track. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think I received 8 votes that time. Okay. Congratulations, Senator Wilson. And before we move on, Senator Warnick, you had your hand up?
No, I was
No.
just voting. I was
Oh, you're
just
just
voting.
voting. Everybody's hands is down now. Okay. Very good. Well,
So can I
thank you
just
very much.
interrupt? I want to interrupt one more time. Sorry, just for purposes of tracking in the minutes. For both votes, we counted 8 people voting, which means 2 people abstained without saying that they were abstaining. So we just want to confirm that on the community co-chair vote that Dr. Diane Levy and Lois Martin did not vote. Can you confirm? We weren't able to see, Lois, whether you were raising a hand or making any indication of a vote. If you could confirm that you did not vote for the community co-chair, that would be helpful for the minute tracking.
No, I abstained from both votes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you
So
for confirming.
I abstained from both votes as well, because as the chair, I don't feel like it was appropriate to me to vote unless I needed to break a tie. So,
And I
Victoria.
abstained from the vote on the community co-chair.
Correct. And Senator Wilson abstained on the legislative co-chair. Thank you. We just want to make sure that we track the voting accurately. Appreciate it.
well, congratulations to both Dr. Levy and to Senator Wilson for your recent election. We really appreciate your willingness to do this. It's a very good, it's a good thing to do. It truly is. And I have a lot to talk to you about soon, Senator Wilson and Dr. Levy. So I'll be in touch. So at this point, again, thank you everyone for allowing me to serve in this position. I truly do appreciate it, and I felt honored to be here. I truly do care a lot about what we're trying to accomplish here. So, Senator Wilson, the gavel is now yours.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Representative Dent, and for both of you as co-chairs for the work that you've done over the last couple of years, and especially as we think about the pandemic and the state of the world right now and the state of the state, where our young people are and how important the work that DCYF does is. And so really appreciate, I know, the time and attention that you both paid to this, and appreciated stepping in and being able to have a couple meetings under the belt before the change actually took place. So Representative Dent, I look forward to our conversations as we move forward. And Diane Levy, looking forward to working together as we move forward on behalf of all kids and families across the state. And again, just staff as well, thank you for keeping things moving and keeping things afloat. We come and go, but staff are really the ones that keep the work ahead, moving forward, and keep us honest, keep us open, and keep us informed. So really appreciative of that as well. And it looks like we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So I'm hoping that Deputy Secretary Ordway is on or around. Is he around? Oh, there you, okay. Hello, as well as Jenny Hedden. So what we're gonna talk a little bit about is, for me, knowing that I've been an interim and doing a lot of work, but while interim happens, a lot of other changes happen as well. And one of the things that happens within agencies and organizations is oftentimes there's shifting and there's moving, and there is perhaps sometimes a change in focus or a change in priority just based on the world. And so what we've asked and what we're going to hear, I think, from both of these folks is a little bit about the organizational and leadership updates at DCYF as we all kind of step into this role as the DCYF Oversight Board, but also as we think forward. I think about the work we have ahead of us and the thoughts we have about priorities that we need to be paying attention to. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass this on. And the hope is, and I think what I'm going to do is ask you both to do your presentation. And as a board, if we have questions, perhaps kind of keep track of them and jot them down if you're like me. And then we'll have a chance at the end for questions so that we can let you do your flow. We actually give you a chance to tell us what you want to tell us before we think you're not going to go there. And then we can kind of start there. And then if there are things that people want to know that you may not have, please feel free to let us know. It's not in your front or back pocket, and that you can follow up with us. And I know Krista will be happy to share anything that comes later on that you may not have that we want to know more about. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to DCYF Deputy Secretary of Operations and DCYF Deputy Secretary, Chief of Staff. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator and Chair. Good to see you. Good to see you. Many of you I have not seen in a long time. Look forward to following up with some of you. Katie, it's been too long. Ruth, Ben, my goodness, it's good to see you all. Good to see you too, Representative Dent. And so it's a pleasure for us to be here. We look forward to giving you some updates here from the agency. And Jenny and I are excited. We've been part of this since the beginning. It was 7 short years ago when we were working on a draft of the bill that created this very agency. And so we're excited to bring you updates here today. Stephanie, why don't you go ahead and share the slides?
Yes, thank you, Senator Wilson, and thank you guys for having us. Again, Frank and I were doing some reminiscing about spending time with many of you in the CTAC conference room for many sessions, developing what then became the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. We're going to share some information just about the agency kind of in general, and a few things that have changed, and some successes and challenges, and then we'll also be highlighting the changes around some of the staffing and just continued improvement about how we're set up, especially after being created in a scrappy startup and then into a pandemic, and now really trying to grow up a little bit here. So we'll see that.
So before we dive into the org changes, as Jenny mentioned, we want to reorient and reground ourselves in some of the strategic outcomes that the agency is oriented toward, and what we're working with our staff to deliver in communities across the state. Go ahead, Stephanie, to the next slide.
So we have done a little bit of clarification of some of the outcomes, the strategic outcomes that DCYF has linked on this slide. You can go to both our agency performance page, where we will have kind of where we are status report against some of these outcomes, but we also have a link to our strategic plan. If you go and look at our strategic plan right now, we had some very high level outcomes that we hoped to achieve for the agency. And as we began to work with that strategic plan, it became clear that the more that we can make this a measurable activity, something where we know where did we start, have we made progress, and be able to actually demonstrate that would be helpful. So we have taken some of those outcomes that were a little bit less measurable in the current strategic plan and just added some targets to those and made them a little bit more specific. So want to walk through these because we have not done a huge effort to daylight these yet. They've really been an internal work in progress for some time here at DCYF. So the first one, and actually if you go to our strategic plan, you'll notice that we actually did not have a prevention goal when the agency, when we were first doing that first strategic plan. And so we have added one because we feel that it is really important for us to have that prevention posture. And we are working on developing a prevention framework and thinking about this even broader than this current outcome, but this felt like an important place to start. So this first one is around safely reducing the need for child abuse and neglect intakes. So not asking people to not report, they need to report if they are concerned. We want to actually work upstream, as I think this agency was originally envisioned, to help reduce the need for anyone to call in an intake on a family. We also are looking at safely reducing entries and reentries into child welfare and juvenile rehabilitation. And we're happy to share how we came to these percentages. They are based in looking at what is possible out in the world. They are certainly stretch goals for us and for our systems as a state, but we wanted to, felt like having a numerical target was really helpful for us to know about progress. The next one you've seen before is to safely reduce the number of children in out-of-home care by 50%. And we can share some information. We are well on our way towards that goal. There's been a combination of a slow decrease that started during the pandemic. We've also been watching for things that were not related to intakes and phone calls into our system, because obviously many children were out of school during the pandemic and were not being reported. But we've also been looking at injury data, and those injuries are down. So we don't believe that during the pandemic, even though we didn't have as many kids coming into care, that resulted in significant safety threats. In addition, and we'll talk about this in some of the success stories, we have implemented House Bill 1227, which changed the removal standard and has resulted in a decline of a little over 20% in the number of kids being brought into care since that went into effect in July. And we'll be have shared data on that. We'll be preparing shortly to have our second quarter of data on that, but it is certainly impacting the number of kids in out-of-home care. We have the lowest we've had in since the 80s and since we really started measuring this. You'll see we had our 90% kindergarten readiness goal that was around for a while. We have reduced that down to 80%, and that's really because we actually looked at, again, some of the data, what is possible, what we think we can actually do around kindergarten readiness, and so we feel the 80% target is more doable. And then we've added a high quality availability and affordability for early learning and for Washington citizens, because it's not just about getting kids ready for kindergarten. It is also making sure that kids have a safe place to be when their parents are working, that all children can access childcare regardless of their disability or race or ethnicity. And so we want to make sure that that is available and affordable in Washington, that high quality early learning. Then the next three measures were really, we talked about transitions in our original strategic plan, transitions for youth exiting DCYF systems. And these are just more specific measures related to those populations. So we have a goal around youth exiting DCYF systems. So that means child welfare. It also means our juvenile rehab systems as well, that they will graduate from high school at the same rate as all Washington youth. And we have made some significant progress in this for both our child welfare population and our juvenile justice population. We also are looking to ensure that youth exiting systems are employed and or enrolled with post-secondary at the same rate as all Washington youth. We're actually pretty close when we look at employment, but not so much when we look at post-secondary involvement. So that's an area we definitely want to work on. But again, having that more specific goal to get youth exiting our systems up to sort of parity with all Washington youth felt important for us. And then the last one was reduced by half the number of youth who experience homelessness within 1 year of exiting a DCYF system. We obviously have a mandate to ensure that that number is actually zero. But again, when we were looking at the overall situation that we have with housing and affordability and issues around homelessness in Washington state, this reduction felt like the more doable goal. We run about 25% right now, so this would bring it down to about 12% of youth exiting may experience homelessness within that first year. And so, Stephanie, we can go to the next slide. Just one thing to sort of, oh, sorry, Steph, can you go back one slide? Just to highlight that we have at the bottom there, I thought there might be another slide on this, but so I just want to make sure that we highlight this, that we are looking to incorporate eliminating racial disproportionality and advancing racial equity in all of these goals. So it's not good enough for us to help all of the white students achieve kindergarten readiness. We have to, in achieving that 80% of kindergarten readiness, we don't want to leave youth behind, young children behind. And so we want to make sure that all of these outcomes are working on racial disproportionality and advancing that racial equity. I would say this is the area we are working the most to figure out how to really incorporate and highlight the agency's commitment to this issue of racial disproportionality and racial equity. And so this is our best guess. Look for this to change. Happy to take feedback about how to make sure that that's really well incorporated into these outcomes.
We're working, as Jenny said, to establish really firm relationships between these goals and issues of disproportionality and equity. Developing a robust theories of change for each of our strategies so we can actually have an organized approach to it and not just have it be a commitment. And then make sure that our work plans, activities, and accountability loops are tuned to following through on the goals that we set.
And with that, I think we can now go to the next slide.
So some of the, the agency is, we're coming up on our 6th year in existence. And after a short time after we were fully formed in July 1 of 2019, 6-7 months later, of course, the pandemic hit, and a lot of our work became focused on pandemic response, both in terms of safety of the families in which we served, providers and our staff. As the pandemic waned, we started focusing on recovery. And we have here some of the successes that we've had since really the pandemic began to wane. And the ones I want to focus on, we were really worried at a point about our ability to staff, our ability to hire, our ability to actually maintain staffing that's necessary to do the work that we do in our 24/7 facilities, in child welfare, really across the board. A number of areas, not just for Department of Children, Youth and Families, but for all state agencies. Working for the state became less attractive after the pandemic. People had more flexibility, access to commiserate benefit packages and those kinds of things. So a number of things that might have made us competitive in the marketplace weren't as strong, and they still aren't. That said, both because of the high quality work that was done in the previous legislative session that helped the state position itself to be a better employer, some of the details that were in the CBA for our staff that are represented really have helped us turn the tide here. And we'll get into it in a little more detail, but our turnover is down, our staffing numbers are up. Having enough people in the seats does not equal proficiency. It does not equal capacity yet, but we are in a much different place today than 6 or 9 months ago when it comes to our concern about staffing. And we're also seeing in a couple of areas of distinct talent or need, be that a 24/7 facility, which in this environment is a particularly tough environment to hire for, or in IT. We are seeing increases in the quality and in the volume of our hiring pools. And so we're feeling like we're on better footing today than we were 6 months ago. And that helps us, of course, achieve all the other goals that the agency has. Go ahead, Stephanie, or go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just to highlight a couple of the other ones. So our reduction in the number of kids in care, we were just looking at some of our most recent numbers, and we are now down to under 6,000 kids in out-of-home care, 5,564 last month. And we are also continue to increase our relative placement with relatives. When a young person child has to be placed in out-of-home care, that we're really doing that search for relatives and placing with relatives. And so again, our last month count was that we were at 57.4%. So over 50% of the time we're able to place with relatives, and we anticipate that will continue to rise. In addition, we've been doing a lot of work to make sure that those relatives can get licensed. And big thank you to the legislature for passing the ability to do our initial licensure payment. That really helps folks identify, oh, this is actually helpful, and get into that licensure process. And we've also been doing a lot of work to make sure that we can waive as many requirements for relatives that are not truly related to health and safety as possible. And so we've been able to increase that rate. I think we're close to 30% or higher of our relatives being licensed, and that's from historically a 10% of our relatives being licensed. Really means that we can have resources going to those relatives to make sure that placement is successful. And then we highlighted that in the House Bill 1227 did a significant policy change, and we did a lot of work in the agency to make sure that caseworkers were familiar with that change, able to ingest that change. We have safe child consults that we have instituted so that they're able to work with other social workers, and determine if a child does need to be removed or not need to be removed. And that was a huge amount of work to adjust that policy change. In addition, in JR, we've done a lot of work on our institutional education. I think many of you have been involved in this. It's been a long haul over a long period of time, but we are definitely seeing increased graduation rates. I believe we just had a graduation, another one at Greenhill last week, and we have vocational opportunities, including a barista program and cosmetology program now up at Echo Glen. And then we have, are well on our way to implementing community transition services, the CTS. So we first step of that was we had to really focus on getting a new tool to identify the needs that young people were going to have if they transition to CTS. That is called the IDEA tool, and we have implemented, I think, about 1,000 of those assessments on JR youth, and it's giving us a much more holistic picture about the needs that JR youth have. And then we have been in PREA compliance. Lastly, in our early learning section, doled out a lot of money, which in childcare, which is not the thing we want to focus on. What we want to focus on is what those resources were able to do in local communities. It stabilized our childcare system in relation to the pandemic, which meant we could come out of that without having just devastating losses of capacity in childcare. So really kept people afloat during that period of time and made some strategic investments there. And we have been able to increase the amount of childcare available and increase enrollment in both ECAP and Working Connections program. And now I think we're ready to go to the next slide. So we still have challenges.
We still have challenges. One of them, of course, is continued staffing, and this is a broad category. We do have areas where, as an agency, we are struggling to recruit, and that's honestly primarily in our back office functions and finance and budget. Finding folks who are able and willing to work for the state in those areas right now is incredibly difficult, which makes some other parts of our operations and reporting to various authorizing environments also more difficult. So that's an area where we're doing some intense focus on a specific sector of our staffing. We also, I mentioned that we've had some decent returns in terms of the number of staff that we're able to retain. That said, we still have significant issues when it comes to certain areas when safety and security that we are focusing on across the agency. Just the training and support of those new staff, given the number of them that we have, is something that we're focused very intently on. And Krista, I see you have your hands up there.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just have a question submitted on behalf of Lois Martin I wanted to ask. So do you want to wait a little bit, or would you prefer questions?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, so this is, yeah, I'm reading on behalf of Lois. Her voice is recovering from surgery, so she asked that I read some questions. Lois asks or states, a number of staff left or were let go because of the vaccine mandate. Now that that is lifted, is there any plan to invite those staff to apply for those vacant positions? She says, I imagine the agency lost institutional knowledge. And does the agency have data on what percentage of the workforce left because of that mandate?
We do not do direct outreach to former employees. I mean, folks know how to apply, and we've made it clear to folks that now that the mandate is in a different state, that they are more than welcome to reapply, and we would welcome their interest in returning to the state. So we're doing our best to, I guess, re-recruit that group. In terms of numbers, I don't have anything off the top of my head, and we had but I'm happy to provide them in the future. We do have some nuanced numbers that show the impact during that time. The reason that people left was varied, but certainly the mandate had an impact. And so happy to bring some more specific numbers and trends from that fall of 2021 back to a future meeting if we want to get into that specifically. But it was a significant, I mean, during that time period, both, you know, again, for a host of reasons, we lost hundreds of staff during that time period across the enterprise.
Thank you.
One of the areas that is of intense focus that has direct impact on staff safety, staff security, staff sense of well-being is our ability to work and support and provide appropriate therapeutic placements for kids with complex needs. I think it's evident for most of the folks around here that are joining us today that the state is not doing all that it could for this group of young folks. We are making significant progress, however, with our partners at DSHS, with legislative support, with executive branch support on constructing a viable continuum of services for residential therapeutic treatment for multisystemic kids. And so there's more to come here, but this is a bi-weekly meeting with leadership from our agency, from DSHS, as well as OFM, to talk specifically about buildings and service mix and how we array the services and supports that we have on the ground as quickly as possible to increase the appropriate and safe residential therapeutic treatment for young people who need it.
Yeah, we're seeing a number of aspects to this. We obviously still have young people that are in what we call exceptional placements and or placement exceptions. And we have some youth that are still experiencing stays in hotels, some youth that are in a state staffed sort of receiving care option that DCYF has created as a response to that. And then some that are in those what we call night to night foster care placements. The numbers are small, and we are doing a lot of work on those, partly related to settling the DS case that was brought against us. We've done a number of asks for investments to make sure that we can address these kids on our side. But what we're recognizing is that this is really part of a whole system of supports that are needed for young people. And in particular, there's a handful of things available in the for adults that are not available for adolescents. So increasing our ability to use partial hospitalization models, for example, for adolescents. And then a big missing piece appears to be what we call a habilitative mental health bed, which is a bed that can treat a young person that has both a mental health condition and a developmental disability. What happens to those young people frequently now is sort of the two systems kind of point at each other and say they can't address the young person's needs because of the mental health condition or because of the developmental disability. And a habilitative mental health option is really designed to get at that grouping. And so we are working with those other systems and especially our partners at Developmental Disabilities Administration. And in addition to the young people that we're seeing, we know that there are young people stuck in hospitals facing the same conditions, and certainly hospitals or state-run or facilities or hotels are not places for kids to live. And so we need to make sure that we have options for them. I'll just note that we are not alone in this. I just recently attended a meeting with our Region 10 partners. That's our federal Region 10. So that means Idaho, Alaska, Oregon, us, all in the same room. And this dominated the conversation. Every single state in the room is struggling with this issue. Oregon and Idaho have been actually renting Airbnbs to put young people in. And again, really around this complex youth that's presenting with a lot of challenges.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, so we'll roll into the other challenge. None of these are small. So fentanyl in Washington State has been particularly devastating. You can look at some of our data around overdoses and other types of indicators around fentanyl. It is definitely representing one of the things that we are significantly concerned about. And in particular, the ability to do safety planning with fentanyl present in a home. So what's a little different for us, we've seen waves of drugs before. It has been crack epidemic and then meth and now fentanyl. And the difference that we're seeing is the lethality associated with fentanyl. So if fentanyl is present in the home, and many of you have seen this, it can look like candy for toddlers. It can create an overdose situation for young children if it's being smoked in the home. And so we're very concerned about this. We do not run the state's response to substance use disorder. And so we're working really closely with our healthcare authority partners to try to develop capacity here, but it is representing a challenge as we have increased that threshold for removing children, which we agree with. But when fentanyl is present in the home, that can be really challenging. And you're seeing that with our increase in critical incidences related to fentanyl have just been increasing year over year.
Yeah, we have the responsibility to read and review all of our fatality and near fatality reports in the agency, and the number of infants and toddlers for whom fentanyl is the primary reason that they're in that report is wrenching. But we also, we're trying to find a balance here between ensuring safety and not exploiting the situation, as concerns about previous drug epidemics have been leveraged for other outcomes that weren't related to the risk. And so we're doing our best here, but this is a profound risk for us. Ruth. Miss Kagi, excuse me, sorry to be so informal.
Well, it's good to see you both. What, that particular balance that you just referenced is, I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit more. I'm aware that, you know, from the days of Senator Hargrove passing a bill that said you had to remove a child when there was any alcohol or any drug present, to the current policy, which I think is much more flexible in terms of taking a child out of a home, but the protecting safety and leaving a child in a home with fentanyl. How are you navigating that, and what external kind of work are you looking at to support families so that children have, you know, more eyes on them to make sure they're safe?
It's a great question, and it's multifaceted, of course. One, we're working with our staff directly on the availability, distribution, and the carrying of Narcan and fentanyl lock boxes, so they can provide at least a sort of a frontline level of safety or intervention. It's not perfect, but I think it's a worthy response. We're talking a lot with local law enforcement, local civil rights organizations, just, you know, checking our math about that response, Ruth, because, you know, we don't want to overreact to the risk. And one of the things that makes it so risky is that fentanyl is present in things that people don't expect. They bought something else. They don't realize that they've even brought the risk into their home, because it's used as a cut additive for so many other drugs, that that's one of the areas that we're most concerned. It's not that somebody's just picking up a fentanyl pill per se, as much as they don't think that they're actually exposing their young child to something as lethal as fentanyl. They find out after the fact. And so training, support, intervention as best we can. It's a multifaceted response, and it's one that we're talking about basically on a weekly basis as we look at numbers, trying to think about, and also listening to what our staff are experiencing in the field, getting direct feedback from what they're experiencing, making sure that we're thinking about their safety in this as well. It's a multifaceted conversation for us right now, and there isn't a single approach to this. And there's great concern out there in the legal community that it will be over leveraged or under leveraged, depending on what side of a particular case you're on. We're navigating those waters as best we can. Mr. Dahan.
I'd just like to follow up
sorry.
a little bit. Are you using more resources like public health nurses and, you know, in-home visiting, things that, you know, to try to assure that children are safe and parents are getting the support they need?
Yeah, I think we're definitely continuing to increase the availability of home visiting programs, which, again, conveniently we also run. We're actually in work right now to change some of the ways that we've been contracting and paying for those home visiting slots to make sure that we can build up our robustness of those services. The challenge, I think, really is that what we need access to, from what we're hearing, and I know you have DCYF staff on your oversight board as well. What we're really hearing from folks is that, managing the fentanyl access is kind of like trying to manage a lightning strike. And so what you really need is the substance use treatment in place. So we are have some pilots out there around pregnant women when we're identifying that they are using and at risk, that we can get them into, not have them go to the hospital, remove their baby, then try to figure out where they should go, trying to access treatment at that point. There's just simply not enough. There's not enough inpatient. There are not enough medically assisted treatment options available for people, especially that are available for the types of populations that we're serving. And so that's a big focus area for us, is not just the home visiting programs are great, and we need to be able to address the underlying substance use disorder.
There is I don't want to steal, and you've got time set aside later for Allison Krutzinger will be presenting on the upcoming legislative session. And there is a bill specific to fentanyl in that presentation that speaks to some work we're doing with our staff and with others around updating definitions and increasing our ability around safety planning and some of those kinds of things. So there's more to come on this subject later as well. Doesn't answer all your questions, Ruth, but it's part of our response.
Thank you.
Mr. Don, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hi, Frank and Jenny. It's good to see you. I'm particularly interested in the effects of 1227. It was controversial. It's a huge change in practice to alter the standard for removal. And as you were just pointing out, it occurs at the same time you're really battling on the fentanyl front. How was it received by staff, and did you get much pushback? Is fentanyl, the fentanyl crisis, causing people to want to make revisions to 1227 and the standard for removal? What's your take on the overall status of implementation of this?
Say pushback. I mean, as you mentioned, it was complicated. So the struggle, if we will, that we had was just balancing all of the imperatives and the complexity of the implementation itself. And we're still in the middle of it. You know, we're watching by week basis the counts across the state, looking for behavior where either we're doing things that are either helping or not. So it's still pretty early on that front. I think and we've got staff on the line. I would even defer to them to answer this question to a degree, Ben, but what we hear is they want some certainty. They want to know, what the agency's doing to keep them safe. Do they have certainty when it's present? And I think you'll see some of that worked out in the bill that I referenced, is that we're working with that very closely with our partners at the union, because this is a concern. And I do, however, believe that we are in alignment, that we only want to remove children from their families when it is the absolutely only thing we can do to ensure safety. And so we're doing our best to keep it there. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Danielle. I don't know if you want to answer this question, but if you've got any thoughts, or if this is germane to your daily life, I'd like to invite you into the space.
Yeah, so I think, if it's appropriate, I definitely don't mind speaking to it. So it's definitely a mixed bag, 1227. What I am hearing from field workers is that there is that uncertainty. Being able to remove children when fentanyl is present is not impossible, at least what we're seeing here along the I-5 corridor. There's been a lot of near-death fatalities due to ingestion of fentanyl, or fentanyl being in the home and the child in some capacity being able to get that into their system. A lot of what we're seeing is with younger children who don't have the capacity to protect themselves. They're either infants or toddlers. It does provide a lot of uncertainty with CPS, with being able to appropriately and safely remove from the home if needed. How courts seem to be interpreting it is they're pushing back against the department when fentanyl is present, and it is difficult to remove a child at that point in time.
Thank you, Danielle. I think the other piece, just to add on to that, is that we're seeing is, and we're kind of hammering on fentanyl because it is I think the largest component of this group. But what we see is that there is a group of children and families that we're concerned about in relation to 1227, where they're extremely high risk, but they're not quite meeting the threshold for removal. And so we're really thinking about what services can we put in there, or did we hit the mark quite right as it relates to those extremely risky families? And so that's an ongoing conversation, when we're having it with our workforce. We are certainly having it with our court partners, and we're having it here today as well. And so really trying to understand that sort of relationship between risk and active safety threats in the home.
Just as an example, it touches on the courtroom dynamics that we'll be going to here shortly, but there are situations where families that are in that condition that Jenny just described, extremely high risk. We know that drugs are present, but perhaps either the behavior or the evidence does not raise to the level of removal. But we have a significant number of folks who are encouraging those people not to get drug treatment because they think it will endanger their case in the court to keep their children. So then we end up with folks who are clearly in need, who would like who might say yes to a prevention service, being encouraged not to take it because of their concern about how it might play out in court. And those are the kinds of dynamics we have to work out so folks that need that service are comfortable and safe saying yes. Right now, it's not. We're seeing enough evidence of that across the state that it's a concern to us.
Can I just add that you will see some things coming out of both the House and the Senate Human Services related to, I would say, not just fentanyl, but let's talk synthetic opioids, because fentanyl is just the drug of today. Tomorrow it'll be something different, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position of thinking that this is it, because it's not. And I think we really need to make sure also we're not conflating fentanyl with keeping families together, or that piece of legislation. Clearly, we need to look at the issues around imminent danger and also around safety. And it could mean removal, but it doesn't mean that that is always the first thing. And I think that's kind of the other pieces. So I know Rep. Sen and I are working on a bill in particular with this population, birth to 5 in particular, around issues around SUD, MOUD, and all the things engaged and involved in that. You'll also see, because of the P25 Behavioral Mental Health Task Force, as well as the Joint Legislative Committee on Behavioral and Mental Health, issues around things like expansion of early ECAP that work with both prenatal women and their children, issues around expansion of ESIT, things around medically assisted treatment, harm reduction, all of those things, because it's not one thing, it's all of these things for kids and families across. But again, as you heard, I think our focus on infants and toddlers, and those the smallest, are the ones that we're probably the most concerned about, and also providing clarity when we talk about imminent harm and removal. So I know we're working with DCYF on that, and you will see a number of things come out this coming short session, because that's critically on top of mind for so many folks. And just wanted to put that out there. Sharonda, I see you have a hand.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Senator Wilson. Frank, could you just give a little bit more information about the comment where you said that there are folks that are discouraging people that may need treatment if they haven't met the threshold to make it into court? I'm just wondering, who are those types of individuals that would advise parents not to seek treatment because it would potentially impact a court proceeding?
Well, I mean, it's, as you know, the legal landscape in which we operate is incredibly complex. It's not, I don't think it's under the direction of any organization or like the policy stance of any, you know, of any legal authority. I think that we have individual cases where families are getting bad advice from their representation. And we hear about it enough that it's of a concern to us, because what we want is a system where families that need services can say yes to them without a sense of risk or downside. And right now, if we've got folks saying don't get drug services because it'll weaken your case in court, we think that's a bad place for us collectively to be. So do I have a graph, Sean, of how many of these cases are happening? No, but it's the anecdotal stories that we're hearing when we're talking with folks and our staff about 1227.
All right, so just make sure I'm clear. So you're saying that legal representation on the parent side is advising parents not to seek treatment because it would weaken their case at a later point.
We have heard that exact dynamic reported to us by our IEGs, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Again, I don't think it's the policy of, you know, like, it's not happening in every case, but it's happening enough that it's something that we're talking about. Like, how do we create a system where those families can say yes?
I think we can move on to our IT infrastructure and capacity, and I'll turn it over to
Yeah, so this is a challenge that you would get no matter what agency you were overseeing. They are, I think, constitutionally bound to put this one on their challenge list. A couple of things. that are success stories in this space, however. We have over the last couple of years made some significant moves to increase the stability of the systems that we currently have. Now, there's some areas where we're running 20 and 30-year-old technology to do our work. We're rubbing sticks together to pay bills and that sort of thing. But we have been able to move those to some much more secure environments. And so our concern about them falling apart and not working is much less today than it may have been 6 months ago. We've also completed some significant moves that were on hold during the pandemic of completing our migration from the host agencies that created us to being DCYF alone. I won't bore you unless you really want to get into IT talk, but we are now part of our own domain, and all of our infrastructure and applications are all within a single environment in which we can manage. And it helps everything from document sharing to security. So there have been some significant steps made recently in that space. We do have, however, significant both asks come in the direction of the legislature around our child welfare information system, which is used by over half of our staff on a daily basis to do their work and ensure child safety. We are currently utilizing a program called FamLink, which was adopted from the state of Alaska in the early 90s, if I'm remembering, late 80s.
Yeah.
Around there, any rate, and we are working to replace that system. There will be some asks in front of the legislature upcoming, but the continued maintenance and inability of that system to deliver the kind of data that we need to respond to you, to authorizers, to give our staff a tool that is honestly respectful and easy for them to use. It is a dizzying tool for new staff to learn, and it is not like any other technology that they interact with. And so the continued reliance on FamLink is a risk to our agency. We also have some areas, as I mentioned before, in the staffing where we don't have the finance individuals. We also have systems that make it very hard for us to do the kind of reporting that either the legislature wants or requires, or the federal government wants or requires in some key areas. And without those IT and staffing solutions together, we're going to continue to have struggles with audits in specific areas. Are they massively important, honestly, to the service delivery? I would say no, but they are important in terms of the accountability matrix of how we spend and use taxpayer money. And without those investments, we're going to continue to struggle there. I see Shonda's hand back up. Maybe that was from before.
That is not true. It should be down. So if it's up, it wasn't meant to. My apologies.
No worries. Thank you.
So the next one is
I'm checking in with you all on a little bit of time check, just wondering, want to make sure we get through to your end and don't want to shorten you. So I broke my promise about questions at the end. So just want to give you a time check.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. We'll go through these last two bullets super quickly, and then I know it's why you asked us here was to talk about sort of our reorg, but it's probably the least interesting part of this presentation, so that'll go quickly. Just highlighting in JR that we continue to sort of really balance two focuses right now. One is on the foundational safety and security of youth that are in our institutions and community facilities, and the public safety for folks living around those institutions and community facilities, with the goal of rehabilitation and the desire to have young people have an experience that brings them from the institution into a community facility and ultimately transition with supports back to their home, because most of these young people are going back to their communities. The last bullet here, and we'll not go into it in too much depth. We've been having this conversation at the Commission on Foster Care recently. We're experiencing a lot of dynamics in the courtroom, particularly around kind of civil behavior and behavior by our relative court partners. And we've had detailed conversations about those, continued conversations with Office of Public Defense as it relates to parents representation, Office of Civil Legal Aid as it relates to the representation for young people. I think all of those system partners share the same goals and outcomes for families, and unfortunately our sort of individual behavior has created a situation where this is one of basically the number one thing that our staff are bringing forward as the reason that they do not want to stay in the job is their treatment in court and their experience in court. And that's not good for anyone if our social workers are changing over because of that. So we are planning with our court partners to really look at this and address this dynamic in the coming year. And with that, we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, on to the organizational changes. So we have made some. These are relatively recent in terms of the assignment that Jenny and I have now. Jenny and I have been, to a degree or another, kind of locked at the hip since the beginning of this agency. And so we come to these two positions with a number of years of intense work together and partnership. So we're ready to go in these new roles and are excited about our responsibilities. There were some changes made in the middle of the pandemic to position us to both deal with the emergency response, and my portfolio was a little bit bigger then. It is smaller now and it makes more sense. Moving the Office of Public Affairs that used to be in my portfolio to the Secretary's office makes all the sense in the world. Those are Secretary responsibilities. And it gives the portfolio that I'm now responsible for a primarily an internal entirety focus. So it's a little bit more streamlined and honestly traditional. And not to put too fine a point on it, but the reality is that we're 1 year away from having a new administration, at least knowing who they're going to be. And we are trying to position ourselves post-pandemic, post-emergency, and a structure that a new leader named by a new governor that comes in makes rational sense for them on day one. And so we're trying to prepare for that inevitability as well. Go ahead.
I'll just notice that little note at the bottom that says all assistant secretaries. So the assistant secretaries continue to report to Ross. You can see this in our org chart here. However, I am taking a lot of day-to-day work for them and making sure that the agency is holding together and especially following through on commitments that we have made. So the strategic initiatives and project management lives in my section as well. So that's some of the work that we're doing to try to make sure that the agency is able to follow through on its commitments. Then we go to the next slide. So I just want to note three kind of key personnel changes. Dr. Vicky Ibarra has stepped in as the interim assistant secretary of the Partnerships Prevention and Services Division. And Dr. Sarah Bealey, who's been with the Office of Innovation, has now stepped up into the interim director of that office. And then Ruben Reeves was officially changed from interim into the formal assistant secretary of licensing.
And Alice Coyle is our new interim director for the Office of Race, Equity, and Social Justice. She sits at the leadership table, as has the Office of Race, Equity, Social Justice for the last 9 months or so. And she will be leading that work for the coming year.
That is
it.
concludes our presentation. Happy to take any additional questions. Know that you also have a tight agenda today.
Boom, that's 2:15. Talk about timely. So I'm glad we had a couple extra minutes. And anyone, I know, like I said, we peppered questions within. So I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions, because right now the only thing that's between you and a 10-minute break is the questions that members might have, but we don't want that to stop the questions. So, all right. I'm certain this will not be the last time we see you, hopefully just the first time, and really looking forward to kind of ongoing conversations and deep diving, if you will, into areas that the board would like to know more information about, or would like to know kind of what I would like to see as solution-focused work that might be happening as we move things along for young people and their families. So again, thanks so much for being here today. And it is 12:16, and let's come back from break at 12:26 and call it good. So 10 minutes, and I think staff have a slide they'll put up. So feel free to take your cameras off, and then we'll see you at 12:26. Hi, if people are here, you could turn your cameras on and then we would know folks are back from break. I see Allison here. Hi, Allison. Got to give us a second to reconvene.
Excellent. In the meantime, can I do a quick sound check? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay, I see folks back. Thanks so much and appreciate it. And we are now going to move into part two. We heard a bit about updates around reorganization and around focus kinds of things for DCYF. And now we're moving on to hear a little bit about the 2024 legislative session priorities. And with that, we have joining us Allison Kritzinger, who is the DCYF Director of Public Affairs. Probably not a new face to hopefully many here. So Allison, take it away. And I'm assuming we'll give you a chance to go through priorities. And again, we'll try to hold our questions, but if we absolutely can't, that's okay as well. And anything that we can't answer or you can't answer, I know you'll follow up with staff and they'll pass it along to us. So it looks like your PowerPoint is up. So thanks for coming and good afternoon. It's all yours.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Steph, for running the slides. Good afternoon. I apologize for my casual location. I'm sitting on a park bench between my commute. My early meeting ran late and I couldn't quite get back to the office. So apologies if there's background noise, but such as the I guess, luxuries of remote work and technology. So thanks so much for your flexibility. I appreciate the tee-in, Senator Wilson. I'm absolutely going to dive right in to talk through our 24 agency request priorities, both decision packages and bills. So with that, I think we can go ahead and go to the next slide. I will say I'm going to do a little context setting and then talk through some of the priorities. Many of you are likely familiar with the timeline here, but just we like to remind folks in our constituencies that we are one piece of a multi-pronged approach to advocacy, democracy, and the legislative session. And so this is really just intended to outline the timeline. I think probably folks here are familiar with the timeline, but we're headed into the legislative session, which begins in less than 4 weeks, but who's counting? And anxiously awaiting the release of the governor's budget, which is the agency's authorizing environment as we head into the legislative session. Folks are likely familiar. We submit our requests to the governor's office, the Office of Financial Management. They'd make some decisions and then release the budget, which should be coming anytime in the next couple of weeks. And that really serves as our playbook for the legislative session, if you will. Because that's not out yet, we'll talk about what we submitted and then certainly we'll revise that based on what is ultimately funded in the governor's budget. So with that, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. For folks who have been around for a couple of cycles, this will be familiar. We have some priorities that guide our decision-making and some principles that guide our decision-making for the development of our legislative priorities in any given year. I won't read them to you, but just so you all know, this sort of grounds our thinking and what we're bringing forward. And if we want to go ahead and go to the next slide, in addition to principles, and this is just a overview of the timeline. So the first timeline slide I showed you is how the legislature, the state agencies, and the governor's office intersect together. This is a more little detailed timeline about the DCYF process. So we start our build, ironically, actually, I'm joking, I'm sort of done with the 24 legislative session and I've already started thinking about the biennial session because we really start our process well in advance of any given session and submit those priorities over the summer and early fall. So again, stakeholder work ongoing throughout, and you can sort of see the more detailed sort of timeline that led to our supplemental asks. You want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So in addition to guiding principles, there are certainly realities we ground ourselves in that inform any set of decision packages or agency requests, any set of legislative priorities. I'll highlight a couple this year that I think are really important. It's a supplemental budget year. It's not a year for our authorizing environment, our authorization for big, for bold, for new, for innovative. Those are really biennial asks. So those you saw last year and we'll see next year. This is about tweaks, updates, small asks, budget adjustments, etc. That's one reality that guides our authorizing environment. Another reality that I think is important that's specific to DCYF is we are implementing significant change, significant investment in every corner, org chart box, office of our agency. We've seen historic changes in the child welfare space, which we're thrilled to be implementing through a focus on keeping families together, the change in removal standard, through a focus on placement preference with relatives, exiting to guardianship as a priority behind their reunification, which remains our first and foremost priority. So we see significant change in the child welfare space as a result of legislation and state Supreme Court cases. We also see significant changes in our JR space as we implement JR to 25 and the Community Transition Services Bill that is in flight. And we also see significant milestones in the early learning space through ECAP entitlement, Fair Start for Kids Act, significant investments that have gone out the door to really stabilize the early care and education industry. All that to say, we are a human system. Humans do our work. And anytime there is change, it is significant. It's significant on changing human behavior. Policy is easy to change. Practice and behavior, it takes time and takes work and it takes care. And so it is important for us that we not layer change on top of change on top of change, because you create fatigue in systems and you create challenges in implementation. So that's really a guiding principle that guided our reality. And then always we are aware of the budget and economic realities that provide an on-ramp for authorizing environment. So all that combined means we really have a limited scope heading into this session. And you'll see that in our asks. We don't have big, bold things. I think this is the smallest total price tag we've submitted in my tenure at the agency. And that's a reflective of the reality we're in and the authorizing environment. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next slide. So this slide is a summary of all of the decision packages and agency request legislation we've submitted in that policy level space, a few maintenance level. It's really a technical term there as far as how things get submitted. We've broken these, and I'll talk through, I have slides on each of them. I'm not going to talk through each of them, just given the time we have, but we'll move through them and feel free to ask questions as we go in case there's a need for clarification. You see them here broken down into really 4 buckets. How are we supporting the staff who do our work? Necessary to implement things that happened in the biennial. Again, this is a supplemental. Supporting core agency needs. We are still very much in we're a new agency still, although maybe creeping out of the toddler year into that preschool space, if you will. But we're still grappling with and rebuilding or building, I will say, our own infrastructure and the core to meet the agency mission and vision. And then the last bucket you see is really those elements that are going to continue to march us forward and make progress. I will say most of the things you see there are about rate adjustments or culmination of work that's been underway, or were carry forward items from last year that weren't fully funded from previous requests. And with that, we can go to the next slide. And so I'll dive in. I'll walk through some of these quicker than others. You have this deck. Sorry, I'm reading the questions in the chat as they come in. I'm going to get through the statements and we'll sort of field the questions as they go. So thanks so much. I see the questions in the chat. I'll get through some of these and we'll see if that answers your question or if there's more digging that is needed. So what you see here is a package that's really focused on centralizing staff safety, staff well-being, and supporting our staff. It is no secret that some of the staff who work at DCYF have some of the hardest jobs, I think, in all of state government and all of industry. Folks on the front line doing heroic work every day in every corner of our agency. And that work takes a toll. It takes a toll on everyone. And so we're sort of grappling with how do we better support staff, especially staff who are faced with critical incidents on their caseload in their direct experience of work. So this package is really looking at bringing on contracted mental health support for our providers who have experienced crisis or critical incident in their work, paying staff, engaging with staff who volunteer and paying stipends to staff who volunteer to go in our peer mentoring program. We stood up a peer mentoring program, a peer support program, if you will, sort of within existing resources, but do not have the resources to pay those staff who volunteer their time to go in and be peer supports when critical incidents happen. So this would authorize funding for that. In addition, it would sort of round out some of the gaps in our overall safety management, emergency preparedness. We recognized and saw that during the COVID pandemic, needing a robust investment, needing some staffing there to support that and ensure we're prepared. And so this is really about how are we continuing to support our staff, in addition to how are we ensuring that we have the critical infrastructure to respond as incidents or things emerge. That's focused on staff safety. And I see another comment. Krista, you'll read the questions in the chat. Do we want to read those as we go, or do you want to wait until I sort of get through?
That
Or
is
Senator
up to-
Wilson?
Yeah,
Senator
whatever
Wilson,
you
I guess
prefer.
I'll defer.
What do you prefer, Allison?
I'm happy to address the question in the chat now. I'm happy to also read it out loud, or you can read it out loud, whatever's easiest.
Sure, I'll read it out loud. So this is again submitted by Lois, of the board members. So is there a funds asked for recruiting and or retaining staff, including salary or benefit investments? Is there an emphasis on reaching out to BIPOC communities so staff begin to reflect many of the families who receive services in the various departments?
Thanks for that question. So I want to clarify that for the majority of staff at DCYF, they're represented by labor unions. And so benefits and salary packages are negotiated at the collective bargaining table. That process happens for the biennial session. Often those contracts start sort of in the spring, if you will. So it'll start in the spring of 24, heading into the biennial session. And that's a labor relations process with OFM, state HR, relevant unions, and then the agencies who participate in those. And so that's where the benefits and salary conversation happens. It's not appropriate for the agency to put forward decision packages that contemplate salary and benefits out of respect for that collective bargaining process and those union conversations. The second part is there an emphasis on reaching out to BIPOC communities so staff begin to reflect many of the families who receive services in various departments. I think I understand the question. That's really an implementation question. And so when we think about contracting out for services, I don't know if this is specific to the SEAMS proposal or the staff safety supports proposal in front of us. Really, it is an implementation question around sort of outreach and engagement, both in contracted services that we're going to procure. That's certainly something top of mind as we continue to focus on diversifying the workforce, but also recognizing the diversity of client we serve, and frankly, the disproportionality that exists in the clients we serve, both in our child welfare and JR system. I know that's something that programmatic staff are focused on, and there's different strategies depending on sort of what we're implementing there. There's nothing specific in this package or in our DPs that contemplate specific outreach or specific staff support there. Certainly embedded in our procurement process, and will be for these contracted mental health supports as well. I want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So another piece that I think is really critical to this agency and allows us to live into our mission and values, but also comply with legislation that passed in 2022, is ensuring that we have adequate resources to compensate and provide stipends for those who participate in work groups, advisory bodies, and offer their expertise as a lived expert. So the law passed a couple of years ago to authorize this. That did not come with enough funds for us to actually do this. And so to be able to do this, we need to make sure we have funds so we have an equitable process, an equitable approach, and equitable resources to be able to share with folks who participate in temporary or ongoing work groups or formal advisory bodies. And so that's really what this is. A bulk of the vast majority of this is resource to move those stipends out the door with a little bit of administrative resource to ensure that fiscal has adequate staff to process payment, as well as we have adequate staff in the community engagement space to ensure that folks have the proper paperwork and things in to get those stipends, to get them timely and out the door. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Another thing is related to sort of ongoing needs and formal investments is the next iteration of the DS implementation. So folks will recall, we're under settlement in the DS lawsuit related to exceptional placements. A robust decision package was submitted and fully funded last year, I'm happy to report. There was a key component of that related to structured team decision-making or family team decision-making that we, in alignment with the plaintiffs, decided needed more stakeholdering. And so we pulled that request out of the DP as it was moving through the legislative process last year and said, let us stakeholder that a little more, let's get some more input and we'll come back. So we did that, we got more input, and we're coming back with that part of the request. So the vast majority of this is for additional resource to support and revise our policy, our practice around quality and consistency when it comes to family group planning meetings for those FTDMs, if you will. In addition, there is some rate adjustments in the payments in some of the placement settings, the Adolescent Transitional Housing Program, and therapeutic foster care. So you see minor rate adjustments there, increases there. And then ongoing funding for the settlement and legal fees, as well as the stakeholder work. So that's what this decision package is about. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We have a rate increase for EPS, or emergent placement services. This is one placement within the continuum that serves as a necessary resource for placing young people who either come into care or have a disruption or need some stabilization in their placement. So we're asking for a rate increase. We have not seen a rate increase in the service line for a number of years. And in fact, have seen underutilization, which we believe is because the rate is not adequate. As folks will recall, we have adjusted our rates, especially in our congregate care settings over the last couple of years. And so this is one of those asks. In addition, we are seeking some flexible dollars to establish additional emergent short and medium-term license placements across the state to meet the need to sort of round out the placement continuum. There's still development work and design work there, but we know as needs change and different needs emerge in different geography, having some flexible resource to be able to respond to those is something that we've identified as could be a helpful attribute to the system as we work to continue to eliminate hotel stays. I want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm really excited about the Family Reconciliation Services community-based pilot, or early adopter sites, if you will. This was the culmination of a large stakeholder process from co-design with lived experts, youth who had received, and families who had received FRS, to really say, based on some legislation that passed in 2020, how do we reimagine and focus our family reconciliation services that are really about supporting families in crisis, back in community and through community-based organizations. So this decision package funds 3 early adopter sites, King, Pierce, and Yakima counties, to move FRS from a DCYF staff-based service to a community-based resource. A few programmatic updates, if you will, largely, but aimed at the population of serving adolescents and families who may be in crisis, really with a goal focused on family stability, crisis resolution, and really keeping that adolescent in community with their family, with their guardians. And so we're excited to see this come to life after a couple of years of stakeholdering and co-design. Go ahead and go to the next slide. What you see here are foster care maintenance payment increases. This one is specific to licensed foster parents, both foster parents and licensed relatives and kin caregivers. I think that's important to note as we talk about our relative placement work and our licensure work that is really successful, as well as extended foster care rate increases. And so the last biennium saw a $50 rate increase to the basic foster care maintenance payment. This actually increases that pretty substantially based on the rate work that we have done, as well as the commitment to redo per some previous settlement and negotiation with foster parents, the commitment to redo and update this rate in every, I think it's 4 or 6 years, I can't remember off the top of my head, but this is a pretty straightforward increase to the basic foster care rate. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, I should say that previous slide is the basic foster care rate as well as the extended foster care payments. And then another piece of the extended foster care rate increase is the housing supplement. So this is modeled off of some work done in California that in addition to the foster care maintenance payment, in high cost counties, they have a housing supplement that sits on top of that for extended youth and extended foster care, young people in extended foster care. And so this is what that includes. And you can see there what the payment structure would look like. But this is really about increasing both the basic foster care rate as well as the maintenance rate, as well as a housing supplement for those extended foster care young people, recognizing many of them live independently and the cost of housing in Washington state is significant. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We also see an increase in our independent living asks. So independent living has also not seen an increase in a number of years. This is also after being submitted after intensive work with stakeholders, independent living providers, young people. So we see an ask to increase rate increase and stabilize programs there. Go ahead and go to the next slide. A couple technology packages. These are largely placeholder slides and have not been updated with what was submitted most as very late to the governor's office, but we continue to make progress in our SSPS replacement. This is the payment system that pays childcare providers as well as foster parents, and need to redo and rebuild our SSPS. So the feasibility study is underway and will be completed. And then this is sort of that first set of investment there. And go to the next slide, and I can follow up with some more details after we see the governor's budget on these. The next is the Child Welfare Information System, or CWIS system, if you will. Again, feasibility study underway, completed this fall. And this decision package is about the cost to transition from the FamLink system, if you will, which is quite antiquated and not modular, which makes it very challenging to use, adapt, and change, and replace that with an updated case management system for child welfare. There's a federal component to this, both in requirements and funding that comes along with this. This is a super important investment when it relates to staff being able to do their work, quality of practice, et cetera, et cetera. So more to come, and we'll get this updated with the numbers after we see the governor's budget as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The next four slides are related to early learning. Three of them, the childcare for families, providers, and ECAP, all build on things that we asked for last year and should be very familiar to many of you, and build on sort of our next set of investments in childcare. So when we think about families, we're really focused on increasing access. A number of strategies here, I won't read them all to you, but really continuing to refine the eligibility rules and remove barriers for families so more families are eligible for Working Connections childcare subsidy. Go to the next slide, which is focused on how do we support providers. And so this is about increasing rates for infant care, the non-standard hours bonus, contracted slots pilot for infants, which we're really excited about, and then aligning overpayments with federal requirements. Again, these were all things we asked for last year, and were not funded, have been robustly stakeholdered over the last number of years with providers and families there. So hopefully these look familiar to folks. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, which is the next set of investments necessary to meet ECAP entitlement. As folks will recall, we asked for, based on the cost model and the cost of doing business, a 40% rate increase for ECAP last year. We were not successful in achieving that entire rate increase. So this decision package largely is the delta between what was funded last year and the rate per the model that we know is necessary to effectively run ECAP. And so you see rate increase asks here, as well as some additional slot incrementation and slots in an incremental way to keep helping us get closer to that entitlement, and then funding to cover some of the quality support pieces, curriculum assessment, etc. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This ask related to transitional kindergarten coordinated recruitment and enrollment came as a result of the passage of 1550, which contemplated the transition to kindergarten bill. Part of that requires coordinated recruitment and enrollment. DCYF did not get funding last year to implement. And so we have a relatively small ask related to local community-based support for that coordinated recruitment and enrollment in geographic areas, sort of that map onto our regions. So there's some additional capacity on the ground to support the school systems and the childcare providers working together in community on that coordination for recruitment and enrollment, as TK and the rest of the early care and education system continue to grow and expand to meet the need. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I know I'm moving really fast. We have one piece of agency request legislation, which is related to infant early supports for infants and toddlers, our ESIT. This is largely technical. We want to change when providers can start counting their monthly count or counting the children enrolled for billing. Currently, it's on the first full month of service, which means if I start on November 15th, my provider can't count my enrollment until December. And so we really want to correct that. So it is in the first month of service, and it does require a legislative fix based on how the law is currently written. So that'll be the one piece of agency request you see us bring forward this year. And we're pleased to say this has been approved and pre-filed, approved and will be sponsored by Representative Sen in the House and Senator Frame in the Senate. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So pivoting to the juvenile rehabilitation space, a few asks here. As we continue to invest in the foundation of safety at Echo Glen, we have a couple of pieces that are critical for the safety infrastructure there. Long ago, when we began the capital project timeline and work on the perimeter fence there was good thought that we would use the wetlands or the pond as a natural barrier. I think given the most recent realities, as well as the growing, the population growth and age, we have decided that actually having a entire secure perimeter fence would make sense. And so this decision package is capital to add what we're calling the fourth wall, although they're not walls, but the fourth side of the fence that would completely enclose the perimeter and not use that wetland as a natural barrier. In addition, and I was reminded this morning as I was on a call with some of my colleagues in the JR space, this would provide central video and tower command and control like we have at Green Hill. Operations at Echo Glen, we currently don't have centralized security, centralized video, and this would allow that and put that in place at Echo Glen, which we think is important as that campus evolves and changes, and we live into those sort of realities. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This decision package is also a result of a class action settlement in a lawsuit brought forth by Columbia Legal Services on behalf of young people who transferred from DCYF back to DOC before their 25th birthday. As a reminder, when JR 225 was written, it allowed for the transfer of young people back. What we didn't have in place at the time and need to establish is an administrative hearings unit to ensure that young people, when transferred, have access to a hearing and due process. And so this is the resource to establish that unit as agreed upon with the plaintiffs. There are a couple of different ways which young people may end up transitioning back to DOC, and this ensures that all of those young people, regardless of the pathway, have opportunity for that conversation in a formal way through an administrative hearing. So this will set that up and allow for that process to happen. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, that's the end. As a reminder, brief list. We do have one-pagers emerging. They're on our government affairs website here. And I will stop there and see if there are questions. Sorry, I breezed through that, but I know I was limited on time and there was a lot of content. So happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Allison? Diane.
Thanks. I wanted to just ask about the issue about fentanyl that was mentioned earlier. Allison, you were not here, but they talked a little bit about how that was going to get worked into some legislative bills. And maybe you went through it and I missed it, but what part were you specifically focusing towards the fentanyl crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not specifically talk about that for a couple of reasons. As folks recall from the timeline slide, we really have to submit our formal agency requests and decision packages in August. They got to be ready and we hit go in September. As we were responding to fentanyl in concert with implementation of 1227, the agency had made some strategic choices to not be reactionary and recommended changes without thoughtfulness. And so I can tell you what's emerged over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks in conversation with advocates, folks of your board here, of the Oversight Board, as well as lawmakers, is how do we respond to the fentanyl crisis? The governor's office, OFM, were asking the same questions. I know he unveiled his opioid package that did have some investments around fentanyl public awareness. I anticipate there'll be some things specific to DCYF clients as far as prevention services to help families stay in the home with their parents. They were not part of our formal request, just given sort of where we were at in timeline. But we are actively engaged in conversation with WFC, our labor partners, as well as lawmakers and other stakeholders on, is there a language clarity that is going to be needed related to addressing fentanyl and the risk of imminent physical harm, as well as those prevention services, drug treatment, MOUD and MAT, contracted childcare, I think is one piece that fits in there, expansion potentially of voluntary home visiting services, other in-home services that can support. So I think you'll see things emerge. They're not part of this process because they weren't part of our formal submission, if you will, as we sort of were unpacking the data and the realities in June, July, August, September, related to the critical incidences and the impacts of fentanyl.
I think you'll see, Diane, given come the first part of January, where you'll actually see bills with bill numbers, because everything is in draft right now and working on just language and such with policy staff as well. So as I said, Rep. Sen and I both have a bill, and we are in conversation with staff at DCYF around language, but it won't come as an agency request, as Allison just said. It'll come from us. And so it's just not at a place right now where there's a bill number on it, but there will be. So you can see that. And again, I think one specific to the whole issue of synthetic drugs as well, that includes fentanyl. And then another one I know that I'm doing related to children and adolescents as well. So it's just a couple weeks too early to have something to hand over. But no, there's things out there, and I know we're not the only ones thinking of that. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Allison, question about the CWIS transition. The potential, even with federal match, is to dwarf all the other DPs dramatically. It could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And is it your intention in the short session to get just enough to keep the planning going with a big ask in 25? Because we are probably, I don't know what the budget will be, but it will exceed $100 million, I'm sure.
It is not cheap. That is, you're absolutely right. I'm not quite sure of the total price, but Ben, that's one of the questions I've sort of begun to tee internally as well. What is the first step? We're done with the planning. So I want to be really clear. The feasibility study is done, and I think we're ready to start building. If you think about it, sort of like a capital project, the design and pre-design are done, and we're ready to start construction. Let's break the ground here. But it doesn't all necessarily need to happen at once, and so I think there is some questions around sort of how the investment in that CWIS can be built out over time. I know our decision package contemplates what's needed in the 4-year. So although it is a supplemental ask that has a huge number, it does look in the out years to say what comes in FY 26, 27, et cetera. And so you'll see that broken out. I'll go back and find the DP that we ultimately submitted with the updates and send that out to this group as well, or get the slide updated as well.
No, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, it is my intention that it doesn't dwarf everything. Everything is necessary, including technology infrastructure investments, and we should not sacrifice rates and programmatic expenditure at the expense of technology. And all are necessary. I recognize I'm not a lawmaker, but there's money.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Allison before I pass this over to our other co-chair for public comment? Allison, thank you. I am certain we probably will potentially see you again. Appreciate the information, and I know if there's things that we forgot and that people want to know more about, we can get a hold of you through Krista, and you can send us anything that you may have forgotten or like to share with us. Please feel free to do the same. So Krista will be our go-between. So thanks so much for your time with us this afternoon. And Diane, I'm passing this off to you.
Thank you. Bear with me, everybody. This is like learning on the go here, but I am going to read a statement that was created regarding the next section of public comment. The DCYF Oversight Board is governed by state law. Per state law, the Oversight Board's authority includes monitoring DCYF's achievement of 8 outcome measures listed in DCYF's foundational legislative monitoring, DCYF's compliance with applicable laws and policies pertaining to early learning, juvenile rehabilitation, juvenile justice, and children and family services, general oversight of DCYF's performance and policies, and providing advice and input to DCYF, the legislator, and the governor. The Oversight Board does not have the authority to inquire into, direct, or change DCYF decisions in individual cases. For those of you wishing to provide public comment to the board, we would like to remind you that the board is subject to the Open Public Meetings Act, which means our meetings are open to the public and anyone can attend as an observer. Our meetings are recorded and posted on the Oversight Board's website and will be broadcast on TVW. We wish to inform everyone in attendance of this fact as an act of respect and support to individuals who may have a sensitive story they wish to share or wish to express individual case details in this setting. The Oversight Board may use any information brought to the board's attention as it carries out its role of general oversight and monitoring of DCYF. If individuals do not wish to provide public comment in an open meeting, individuals may contact the DCYF Oversight Board staff to get connected to the board co-chairs. We are also more than happy to connect you with the Office of the Family and Children's Ombuds if you wish to file a complaint about DCYF's action or failure to act in a particular case. Their website is www.ofco.wa.gov. Thank you. So now I think we're going to proceed into the public comment period. Nicholas, did you send me a list? Sorry.
Yeah, I did know it.
You did send a list. Okay. Okay. So we would like, we have received one written comment, public comment that was sent out to the board on the 8th of December. So you all should have had a chance to read that already. We have 2 signed up now for the public comment period. And we usually ask you to try and keep your comments to around 2 to 3 minutes. I will probably not do a great job on names, so please feel free for those of you who are making public comment to correct your name if I've misspoken and not pronounced it correctly. So the first person we have is Zion Bray L.
So we have yet to see Zion join the meeting. They did sign up prior to the meeting. So we could go ahead and probably go to the next participant, see if Zion joins or after that comment.
Okay, great. Thanks. The second one is Sylvia Zarate.
Yes,
I see
hi.
Sylvia's name. Yeah. Go ahead, Sylvia.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for allowing me the 3 minutes. So I had to make my story public in August of 2023. Just Google up Sylvia Zarate, foster parent, Granger, Washington. At least 9 different newspapers took my story. This is not an individual case. I'm not just talking about just myself. After that, I had several foster parents reach out to me that they went through a similar situation, but in their case, they had no resources to fight back their founded finding. And some of them lost their careers due to that. I'm speaking on behalf of them. And I can only talk a little bit about my case, but I ultimately I'm here to advocate for myself and those foster parents that had no voice, no resource. I was falsely accused of child abuse, went to court, spent over $180,000 in legal fees, and ultimately won after 3 years. DCYF kept appealing, and then in the end, they had nothing. I was able to get the founded overturned and the denial of my foster care license overturned. But right now, my life is really in a worst situation possible due to me fighting back. And I understand that, you guys are limited on what you can do. But I just want my story out there, and I would like help for those foster parents and avoid another tragedy happening. If DCYF would have done their job correctly, I wouldn't have to gone through this unnecessary turmoil. The appeal process is long, it's difficult, and expensive. Luckily, I have the resources and the courage to fight back. But what about the other foster parents? Not a lot of foster parents do. All I'm asking is that, if there is anything that you guys can do to look into this, I would greatly appreciate it. And like I said, on behalf of those foster parents, I let those foster parents know that my experience will not go in vain, and I will do everything I can in my power to advocate for change. I'm working right now with the People's Rights Organization to help brainstorm a bill that would help, foster parents have more resources. But as you know, it is a difficult process. It's not easy, and I get it. My question to this agency is, who is holding DCYF accountable for this?
What is this agency going to do to ensure that DCYF is following their own policies and procedures to ensure that this does not happen again? I understand the child's ombuds, but you have to understand that all they can do is investigate and send their findings to the governor Inslee. That's it. There's no accountability on the social workers. There's no reimbursement for the damages. There's nothing for us foster parents. Please help, and if you can, please do something. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for those words. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and share your concerns with the board. Krista, do we have anybody else for public comment? Or Nicholas?
No, we had an official sign up that we had to cut off about half an hour before the public comment period, and besides Zion, we did not have any other individuals sign up through that process, and we don't see Zion on it this time.
Okay, then I think we're completed with the public comment period. Senator Wilson, I think it goes back to you now.
All righty, thanks so much and appreciate the comments. And hopefully folks did read the one that came via email earlier this week. And now on the agenda, we've got an opportunity for some board discussion. And in particular, I think what staff was going to do was have a slide that was going to kind of give us the outcome areas that are required to assess DCYF's performance annually. And boy, I hope somebody's eyes are better than mine, because that's really small. And the hope is that, we can just have some discussion and conversation around top priorities that kind of fit within our scope of work. But as a board, what do you see, and what would you like us to focus in on or do work on in this coming year? And I'm just going to throw it open. And I'm not sure, Krista, if everyone has seen this before, if you want to walk us through it, just a kind of high level to give us all a kind of a frame and a place to start.
Sure. Yeah, so this is the same. It looks a little bit different, but these are the exact same outcomes that show up in the board's annual report that we do and look at the performance from the agency. But to run through them real quick, we have the eliminate racial and ethnic disproportionality and disparities and system involvement across child and youth outcomes in collaboration with other state agencies. The next section is specific to early learning. We have an increase in the number proportion of children kindergarten ready as measured by the Washington WAKIDS Inventory of Developmental Skills Assessment, including mathematics, with a particular emphasis on mathematics. Increased proportion of children in early learning programs that have achieved a level 3 or higher early achievers quality standard. Increase the available supply of licensed childcare and childcare centers and family homes, including providers not receiving subsidy. I don't know if it's beneficial to go into listing all the child welfare outcomes, but there are 9 of them listed there. These are also majority are federal requirements that are also reported on by the agency. There are a few that are not, I believe, including the develop strategies to demonstrate foster families that their service and involvement are highly valued by the agency. And then the fourth section, is covers a few different areas, but includes juvenile rehabilitation, juvenile justice, and adolescent services. And that has a wide umbrella, but includes reducing multi-system involvement, reducing homelessness, increasing graduation rates, and overall successful transitions into adulthood for youth involved in either child welfare and juvenile justice systems. This also incorporates reducing future demand for mental health and substance abuse treatment for youth involved in these systems, as well as working with the juvenile justice courts, reducing recidivism, and as talked about, I believe, earlier in the meeting, the eliminating discharge of youth from institutional settings into homelessness. So this is straight from the RCW that was the founding legislation for DCYF and what we use as an outline for the board's report. So just to help keep the board grounded in the focus and scope of work that the board is mandated to.
Bobby Bridge, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I agree that this is, you know, our overall, our arching, the looks that we do, our overarching looks that we do throughout the year. And of course, we have been silent this year for a variety of mostly good reasons. But at the end of last year, there were a number of concerns raised by members having to do with the abolition of the adolescent unit. And these were really specifically focused on issues that in kind of crossed child welfare, extended care, and juvenile justice. And we were endeavoring, actually, I think it was just about the same time as we are now last year. We were endeavoring to try to pull off a meeting in either late winter, early spring, but of course that just wasn't feasible. Totally get it. But I don't want to let go of that because I don't know about others, but I haven't seen how it's going. I don't know what the rationale was for the decisions. I mean, obviously the department can make the organizational changes that it deems appropriate in order to do its work most effectively. But I would like to see what repercussions, if any, have come from this change.
I appreciate that. And let's jot that down, and maybe we could dig in a little deeper to what's happening related to adolescent services and supports. I know there had been concern from the oversight level. I think it was one of my first meetings, as a matter of fact, or I read minutes or something related to that, and know myself have had conversations with DCYF around what happens inside an agency and what happens to the local community and what role DCYF plays. So just also as a chair human services, youth development and prevention services are critically important. And many folk think they sit in K-12 when oftentimes they really don't, because there's academic focus there, but not sometimes the support that we're talking about for wraparound services and support. So would be happy and ask that Krista kind of take some notes perhaps as we chat as potential things that we could dig into and ask DCYF to come back and report out on related to, again, I think changes in what's happened inside, but also the impacts it has on the individuals they're serving on the outside as well. So thanks for bringing that forward. Yeah. Ben.
I know that these issues are very important, but they feel like we're, to me anyway, that we're frozen in time because so much has happened since the original legislation was created. Take, for example, 1227, which radically shifts practice, and this board would have an interest, I would think, in making sure that the agency is making great progress. We never would have envisioned that at the point that 1661, the enabling legislation, was created. There are also things that are related to reunification, which is on the list. Things like visitation. The legislature has been very clear that they want to measure the time to the first visit. And I suspect that, that the agency is doing very well there, but really, we don't really care about the first visit because we assume that the first visit instigates continuous visits. And so time to second visit and third visit is just as important. So to summarize then, I don't think we should be limited to only these topics, but new topics and topics related to these things that we now understand more fully.
Thanks. And I too wonder oftentimes where things come from, and especially in legislation, and at what point and what time might it be a good one to kind of look and review and say, is this still the way it should be, or is this an opportunity for us to think forward given change in circumstance, change in the world, and again, the role of and the name oversight is a little deceiving, I think, as well, and it might be an opportunity also to really do some clarity around what's the role and kind of and what role we do play, because I know that's been a little bit of a question in some's mind as well. So let's track that as well. And I think it's a good conversation, especially as we have a new 2-year term coming up. It gives us some opportunity to think forward, because most of this conversation won't happen until after session, given the short nature of, the fast pace of what happens from January until March. So we will write that down as well. Thanks so much. And Diane.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the prior two comments. First, with respect to the adolescent issue, and actually both, there's just such a feel like there are some different environmental happenings now in sort of these areas that are really impacting things. And I think about fentanyl as the one that really hits me, because I think this, when we started with the DCYF Oversight Board and DCYF, really, fentanyl was not yet on the horizon. As somebody mentioned, there have been a lot of other drugs that have come and gone, but this one just seems to have such a more of a lethal focus. And so I was thinking about the adolescent issue, because with adolescents, it was interesting in the materials that you sent out from the Child and Family Ombuds Office, because you see in some of the near fatalities, there's actually like a kind of a U-shaped curve where you see the fentanyl impacting for fatalities, and I think both near fatalities and fatalities in the infants in the up to 3, but then there it goes up again, right, in the adolescents. So when we're looking at groups of children overall and youth, looking at specific things that impact the adolescent population, I think is very important that we don't miss some of these kind of subtleties that are really impacting them. Suicidality is another one that I think we really need to continue to keep forefront. So I guess that is sort of a long-winded statement to just say I support the idea of maybe taking a look at these adolescent issues in specific. The other thing since I've got the mic, I think the other thing I constantly kind of think about where we can kind of push things upstream, right? Like to try and do that prevention work. The fact that they didn't have a prevention statement, DCYF, in their initial strategic plan is a little bit, I would say it was surprising to me. And I think that we have to continue to look at where we can insert prevention and support families really early on in the whole process, and starting with prenatal to early relational health. I think there's a lot of potential that we could look at too, with interfacing with other folks that work in this specter and sphere. I'm thinking in particular of medical providers who are seeing those kids in that area. So just some thoughts off the top of my head. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will also say I'm a systems thinker, and there's lots of work that's happening. So this isn't the only conversation. I think the other thing is how we bring work that's already been happening or happened to this group, so you don't think there isn't anything happening. And in particular, I think about the P25, the Child and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group that just put forth 10 recommendations to the governor and to the legislature that cover the prenatal or perinatal through 25 space, which is really the scope of this particular group's work, as well as there's a joint select legislative subcommittee now also on behavioral health, mental health, that impacts a lot of what we're talking about in this group, as well as an institutional ed task force. So there's lots of things coming out. I think the important thing is how we bring those things forward, and then how we create the knowledge, right? That whether those things are happening or not. And I think it's also about outcomes, as we talk about, not just the what, but so what, and then where the holes are. And I'll just say our systems were never meant to help people out of them. They were created to keep people right where they were, if you so to speak. And so prevention's not been something that you see up there, because it's one of those things that would actually keep people from being inside systems. And so it is about disrupting that and creating opportunity, but also the resources for those changes to happen. So really look forward to having those conversations, and also kind of where those things lie, the last 2 sessions we've been talking, does prevention lie in DCYF with young people, or does it lie in K-12? And where are the children? Which is the same conversation as we think about adolescent services. You know, where are the children and where best do we connect with them? And so just look forward to, as a group, continuing to have some of those conversations and thinking about how it impacts our work here as an oversight board. Lots of stuff. Katie.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. I am not sure if this is the appropriate forum, but as a board member, I would be really interested in hearing from experts such as like public health on kind of the issues we're hearing regarding fentanyl, because I've heard all over the board to powder on clothes can overdose an infant and cause a fatality, to actually no, there are no studies, that's never happened. And so I think as we, you know, go into a fentanyl response of some sort, having the board have a really good understanding of what are the risks, what aren't the risks, what does happen, what's a myth, would be very helpful, at least for me.
I appreciate that. And I had a chance to sit in the room with policy experts from DCYF who actually were sharing some of those statistics and the data. And again, the impact around, again, I think Allison mentioned it, especially around fentanyl and the synthetic opioids. So I think, again, that would be a great piece of information to help ground us as we think forward about what that work looks like for us, I think, in all of these spaces, because clearly it's impacting every one of the buckets, if you will, that are under and on the graph. So great idea. Other thoughts? Senator Warnick.
Thank you, Senator Wilson, and congratulations to you and to Dr. Levy for being co-chairs. You know, what concerns me is what I heard from our public comment. And I know that that was, you know, a specific individual. However, I worry that we're not supporting our foster parents as well as what we could. I'm afraid we're not only losing staff for various reasons and trying to rebuild our staff after the pandemic, but we are losing our good foster parents. So I think if we could look at ways that we could encourage and rebuild our foster parent programs, I think would be very, very important for this oversight board to look at as well.
Thank you. And I agree, regardless of how much we do and how supportive we are of if children are in the context of their own families, we will always have situations, unfortunately, where we do need to have safe places and spaces for children to be. And I think it's critically important that we do that and we support that as well. So duly noted and I think written down, and kind of what does that look like? And again, as we think about, again, the opioids and the new drugs coming in, just had a family that is fostering someone I know, a newborn, and thinking again, much like we did with fetal alcohol syndrome or with cocaine, what are the impacts it has on the children now that are being born potentially to parents? And I think that that's also education, but support needed for those who are caring for those children as well. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah. Dr. Levy.
I was just thinking too, in terms of maybe that we're talking about priorities for the next year. And I think one of our priorities really should be looking at the role of the oversight board. And what we have it sort of the legislation. I think it would make some sense. We have a new member of the board. I think it would make some sense. We have a new administration coming in. I just think maybe we should have a frank discussion about what the legislation set out and what we're doing, and are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Is there a way we could be more effective? So I'd like to kind of offer that up as one thing that we should get into in this next year.
I would agree. And I think it also matters who actually gets into the governorship, if you will, so we can plan forward, but also probably need to be doing some conversing around what the potentials look like, because again, yeah, kind of role and goal clarity is really important, and language and purpose and all those things. So written down, duly noted. Thank you. Ben.
Has anyone heard of any potential legislation of this session that would affect us?
On this particular topic?
On the focus and organization structure of the board, any changes that might affect the way we do business?
I don't know, Senator Warnick, do you have any?
Yeah. I have heard of a potential draft being passed around, but I don't have, I don't have the details of it. So if it does become the light of day, we'll let you know, but especially the co-chairs at this point. But I have heard that there is some discussion about potential legislation, specifically with the governance of the board.
Seems like Krista and Nicholas ought to be nosing around about that.
I
would kind of be hesitant to think there would be a change before we would have a change in leadership, but there very well could be. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
We will follow up when we know more.
Okay.
Other thoughts, areas of focus? Well, I myself, I'll just say I'm keeping an eye on, we've gone J to 25, and what we know is we moved kids there, but that we haven't necessarily done all the things we needed to do to move support, or to look at what we need to do differently when we've got 21 to 25-year-olds in a place or a space that was, even though they're still adolescents, they're older than that. And so, and in particular, I worry about our young kids right now that seem to have a higher, more, the crimes they're doing are worse, it seems, and they're younger. And so again, as we think about youth and youth development and services and supports and prevention, that's, a space that's really, really important, but have been challenged the last couple sessions, to be honest, where that work sits. And so would love to think forward with this group. Again, as we talk about prevention, is this the place for it? Or perhaps, again, an OSPI, but I just think we have kids, a lot of it has to do with licensing. We can only license, and kids' families are accessible. They can only license up to age 12. And some of our schools in elementary school go to 6th grade. And so kids are there without the ability to be in before and after school programming if their families are not eligible to pay for it or they can't pay for it. So just some things about gaps in service, if you will, and how we might plug some of those things or support that. Judge Bridge.
Yeah, you said a mouthful, but the kind of question you were raising about where this stuff sits about the increasing violence by many younger kids. I'm not sure what the data shows for sure, but I know what the headlines scream. And a lot of it, of course, is about guns. But we do have to know that we have a very small piece of the juvenile justice pie here in DCYF. We're a county-driven state. that's where juvenile justice lies. That's where a lot of the prevention is, but I don't think that we need to shirk the responsibility that DCYF still would have on services that are tending towards prevention of the behaviors that we see as these kids age. So I still feel that the focus on adolescence is appropriate, and recognizing that we are looking at a singular population too, not the least of which is those that are at Echo Glen. That whole place needs to have a look-see.
Thank you for that clarity. That's really helpful about the, the county-driven state and just the idea of where the support or where resources are. And you're right when you think about it. And there are things we can do, but that's, it may be different than the other kinds of things we're looking at. So.
Yeah, and there are ways that, again, in our meetings, or in small group sessions, however, if we decide to, try again to reorganize ourselves around affinity groups, if you will, and not try to bite off huge chunks at every single large meeting. But, we could engage our county partners in dialogue about what they're seeing on the ground and how we might fit in with that, how we as in the department and we as the department's oversight board.
Thank you. Representative Kagi.
Thank you. The emphasis on the oversight board in its authorization and goals has always been focused on outcomes. And I think, I know we're not going to put together a report this year, but I think it would be useful to have the outcome data for these different indicators. I mean, the presentation we just had from Frank and Jenny showed that there's really been quite remarkable progress on reducing number of children entering care, on children not being Krista sent out some information with the agenda showing that the reoccurrence of abuse is well below federal levels. I think it would be helpful for us to look at where are we with these outcomes. And I know we've reported on them in previous years, and I think it just would be for our own perspective and maybe helping us to focus on what we need to do in this coming year. I think it'd be very helpful to have that.
So like almost a culmination of since the beginning, kind of where we're at as far as from the beginning of DCYF of oversight or the last number of years, or what are you thinking just since the beginning of the board?
From the first reports that we issued, I think we've reported on these outcome measures pretty consistently. And just to have a real picture of what is the trend in the department in terms of outcomes.
Right. Other thoughts? Because what I'm thinking is we could kind of take all these ideas, and then I'm hoping Dr. Levy will be willing to meet with Krista and stuff. We could maybe look at them and see how we might create, if you will, kind of something that makes sense as far as what's first, then what's next, and kind of put together a thought about a time frame forward, and share that with the board to see if it kind of fits with the conversation about kind of what's first and then what's next as we move forward, as a way to kind of distill the thinking today and kind of think about what our next steps might be as before we come together as a board, so we spend our time wisely and feel like we're getting not only our needs met, but the interests that we have also. We've got folks there to answer the questions people might have, if that makes sense. What haven't What haven't we brought up or thought about?
Well, I, for one, feel a little rusty after not meeting for a year. So I just want to say that I feel like we're probably just sort of starting to kind of get these, get ourselves going again in this space. Many of you are much more active, working kind of in your daily jobs in this space than, for example, I am. But it is, I think it may help if people, and I don't know, Krista, with the Open Meetings Act, if people have thoughts after this meeting that come to them, or some real thoughts about what they'd like to see in terms of structure and future direction, I think they can send to you, right? But they just should not send to us as a complete board, correct?
Yeah, correct. The only thing we want to avoid is any type of majority of board members having an email conversation with one another. It needs to be available to the public. So anyone can send anything to me, and then I can send it out to the board in the ways that I usually communicate with the board to make sure that information is shared. And then we can come up with a system of either during a meeting, having a special meeting, if we need to refine or vote and make sure that we are all on the same page, we can definitely make that happen as well.
And yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I guess my other question I guess I have is there a way of understanding from DCYF itself how we could be helpful to them? In other words, I mean, I don't want to just be kind of like an exercise that they come and kind of give us a PowerPoint and then they go back. I feel like to some extent that doesn't seem all that helpful. And I'd be interested in knowing what their perception is of our board and where we could potentially be more effective and efficient. I don't know, just a thought. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think part of it has to do with the legislation and the legislative intent and kind of where that kind of fits. And so as we think forward about perhaps the next iteration, that's kind of maybe where that conversation fits in. I'm not sure. I also am going to want to ask again and maybe have some other conversation in other board meetings I've been at. Even with open public meetings, we've been able to do some small group things. And I know, Krista, you and I talked about that, and that was not necessarily anything we could set up for today. But as we move forward, if we've got some different areas that we would like to have some conversation on or whatever, not that any decisions are ever made in those groups, but how it is that we potentially can use, is it on big group all the time on this, or are there some other ways that we can utilize our time together during the meetings to either have conversations or do some thinking and then bring thoughts forward? And happy to talk with our AAG folks about what that looks like, but just curious why, and perhaps why it may work in some spaces and places and not in others, and want to figure out if there's something potentially, if we ever want to do that, that would allow us to do that. So just as a, yeah.
Can I just jump in real quick on that piece? And I'm happy to talk with you offline, or we can have a conversation with Krista, the chairs, and Krista and I. But I did want to point out, just for consideration, that in your bylaws, you do have Article 3, which allows you to establish committees of the board. You can do that as standing committees or ad hoc committees. So to the extent you have particular issues that you want to drill down on, a lot of boards will do ad hoc or standing committees, and you basically, what this is saying is that the board, you would make a vote to establish those committees. You can structure them so that they're with quorum or without quorum, so that you can be having conversations as a committee, and then you bring them back to the board. Your bylaws do say that these are advising committees, so they will be having offline discussions and then bringing them back. And it's a very effective structure that a lot of boards like yours use. So that is one thing that I'll just throw out for now, but I am happy to have further conversation about bigger OPMA issues that would be better to do offline. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Judge Bridges.
In fact, in fact, we did that, and we did experiment with it, what I was calling in my earlier remarks, affinity groups. And I don't remember, there were 3 or 4 of them, and staff brought us, had us come together from time to time to look at, I think it was around the strategic plan, frankly, that drew us into that. But I really support 100% looking at that model to make us more effective, to the extent that we can do it, as council has advised us that we can do it and still comply with open meetings. The idea of having, for example, some of these deeper dives into hearing from professionals, so experts, etc., that may be of more interest to 3 or 4 of us than it would be for the whole body of 12 or 13 and growing. I'd really like us to consider that again, the feasibility of it, what worked and what didn't work last time, all of that.
Thank you. And I count on the expertise of the folks who've been around long enough to know kind of how things may have been and then how they are and what's good and what's indifferent. So always up for that myself. Rep. Kagi.
I wanted to ask Krista if there's where we are with the number of vacancies that we have. Obviously, we are greatly diminished in our ability to do our work if we have half of the board members. Has there been any progress with the governor's office on that? I appreciate that Danielle is here, but I'm wondering about the judge and the law enforcement and all the other positions.
Yeah, great question. So we have, in statute, there's 21 member roles, including the non-voting member, which is the governor's policy advisor representative. Of the remaining 20, we have 12 that are currently filled, and that means we have 8 that are vacant. As far as movement forward on membership, I have not heard anything about those roles with consideration of what the process is. We can always follow up again with the governor's office to see what that status is. But the member roles that are empty currently are the 2 youth positions, the law enforcement representative, the judicial representative, both tribal representatives, both east and west of the Cascades, and an expert on the an expert in reducing disparities in child outcomes by income, race, and ethnicity, as well as a representative of an organization that represents the best interest of the child. So those are all currently vacant.
Okay.
That's a lot.
All right, well, let us know what you hear when you check back with the governor's office.
I know that there were no applications in the governor's office, because I think there was an inquiry made, if I recall, about if there were any current apps. Krista, do you remember? I think you were on that email with both Rep. Sun and myself wondering. So
I don't have the most up-to-date information on that, but I know that the most recent, I heard there's potentially 1 or 2 applicants in that could be considered for positions, but I have not heard any movement on those.
Okay.
So I can get an updated status and get back to everybody.
That would be great.
I thought that the CASA office had wanted to be have an appointment for the representing the best interest of a child.
I have not heard anything.
Am I
about
remembering
that
wrong, Krista? Huh?
I haven't heard anything about that position specifically.
Okay.
That's complicated over some organizational issues in CASA.
Yeah, maybe you could clarify, how does one, I'm remembering back to my process, which is now 4 years ago, hard to believe, but how does one become a board member now? Like, do they put their name in the hat? Do people go out and try and recruit? How does it happen?
So yeah, the formal process is that the governor has a boards and commission website, and that's where anyone that wants to serve on any boards and commissions through the executive branch applies. So there's a drop-down menu. Individuals can select the oversight board from that drop-down. The vacancies, it does not necessarily reflect what positions are vacant. So the vacancies are reflected on the board's website currently. That's DCYFoversight.wa.gov. So anyone that would fit those roles could go on and apply and submit an application through that portal with the governor's boards and commissions. And then the actual procedural process for getting a new member on the board is outlined in our statute, which is RCW 216-015. That talks about that the governor has the authority to nominate individuals for certain roles, and then the 4 sitting legislators on the board must approve those nominations. So there's a little bit of a 2-step process there. As far as who wants to apply and who's interested, we always encourage people to just notify staff or any board members if they're interested in applying. So just we have a heads up, and then we can do, our communication piece just to let the governor's office know, or the boards and commissions office know that we know an application is coming in. So they do have a high volume of applicants for all the boards and commissions coming in at any given time. But we can do our part to at least let them know that we expect an application has been submitted and try to go along the process. But it does sit with those authorities as far as who is actually nominated and then who is approved.
But as this is Bobby, as a practical matter, however, a lot of those folks that are missing are typically, not always, but typically appointed through associations or advocacy groups that they are part of. And the statute is pretty clear. Like if you're talking about law enforcement, it's going to be WASPIC or somebody. Superior Court Judges Association, if it's the judge. I mean, there's outreach that can be done, whether that's our role or whether it's the governor's office's role. But I think that can come into play as well. And not just.
I think if we want more members, it's that we could be more proactive in seeking.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Identifying people who are interested.
Right. And to just say that, if anybody's interested, they go to the portal in the governor's office, and point of fact,
I think part of the problem is in the legislation, if you will, the statute, it talks about not organizations, but individuals, if I recall. So it's not that you're representing an organization, correct? You're just there as an individual who has expertise in a particular area, which is very different in my mind than someone who's there representing an organization of folks. Is that correct, Krista?
Yes, for most of the positions, they don't have a link to being nominated or representing an organization that would identify that candidate. Doesn't mean it can't happen that way, but the statute does open it to anyone.
And that's all I was trying to say. I didn't quite say that these organizations should do it.
No.
These organizations should be notified that some of their members need to know about this work, this board, and anybody who might be interested should be applying, and this is how they do it. That's all I'm saying, is that maybe
I'm in agreement with you, because again, traditionally it's organizations that are reached out to, and in this case, that's not how this is written. And so it is very different than and at least again, than some of the other spaces I've been in. So it is important to the reach out, because it doesn't come from the governor's office. It would come from folks here. Katie.
Another thing just to throw in, which is something I often am looking at, is there's some roles on here with lived experience. However, those individuals would be donating their time. There's not a stipend that comes with this or anything. And so that is always a consideration for me, is that you're asking someone to give 3-4 hours of their time to this. And if that involves taking time off another job, that can be a significant barrier. So as we look at, equity across things, making sure that we're not expecting some members to give time, but that everyone receives compensation or no one receives compensation.
And I actually follow up to that, Katie. So when DCYF did their presentation on asking for some of that funding to provide that living expert stipend, it applies to the board as well. So we do have that policy that provides a living experience stipend to members. And we do have that funded not through our individual budget, but it's actually through the governor's office budget as a whole for all boards and commissions that are staffed through there. So that is something that we do offer, and be happy to provide information on that so we can get the word out more on that.
And just one like logistical thing, I had applied for a position on a board right after the current governor came into his first session in office. And it took about, if I'm remembering, over a year to get cleared by the governor's office because of all the new staff and so forth. So I don't know if there's some reason for us to maybe kind of try and move a little bit on some of these appointments before they actually do the new transition.
Good point.
I've been doing a little reaching out, just a little FYI, so we'll see how we do.
Let us know if we can help.
Yeah. Other thoughts around forward momentum movement, kind of looking at who we are and where we are and how we move forward based on kind of where we've come from and how much movement we've been able to make, as Ruth talked about, and kind of focused on outcomes and what does it look like if we put those all together, and maybe that helps us kind of think forward. I think also we have some pressing, I think, public health issues that aren't necessarily reflected on the document as was written, and they may fit into the buckets, but I also hear there's some urgency or some sense that it would be helpful to have some more deeper knowledge around kind of some of those top of the mind issues. And one of those was Katie brought up like fentanyl, and really having some public health folks here to help us understand a little bit more about the impacts of that. We talked a little bit about process and how we might be able to think about using our bylaws to help us maybe do some deeper dives or smaller group conversations around areas of interest or affinity groups, if that's something. We talked about kind of what our role is and how do we know if we are just a tool or whether we're a task for DCYF, and how do we where do we provide and how do we get that clarity around that. And then thinking future about, if we were to kind of do a think about how we thought of ourselves looking in the next 5 years, for example, what might that look like? And, what would an effective group look like? And are we, I guess for me too, I still wonder what an oversight board is. So I'm curious as we think forward in the statute, actually digging a little deeper into what our role actually is in conversation with DCYF and maybe the governor's office as well. So just some thoughts that came out, and the idea is that there are some groups of folks that we need to continue to focus in on. And it's not only those that are hurting, but those that are helping those that are hurting. So kids, families, foster parents, kinship, guardianship folks, as well as staff, I think, that are working there. So a lot of good conversation today, and I'm appreciative of the brains in the room, just saying, and our work together. And Krista, do we have dates as we move forward for the meeting, or what's our next step as Dr. Levy and I take on this co-chair role and kind of move the group forward? What's our next steps?
Great question. So we do not have any dates set out currently. Before we had this last year, we were meeting, I believe, oh gosh, now I can't remember. It was the third Thursday of every month, but I don't know if we had standing meetings every month. I thought it was every other month, but we had several special meetings in between. But on average, we were starting to meet every month. I know that the previous leadership, we did have it on the books for every month meeting. So What staff can do is, I mean, I think it'd be great for the board to discuss and decide how frequently the board would like to meet, and then staff can work on some doodle polls and scheduling to make sure we can get the most board members present on a regularly scheduled time and get that on everyone's calendars for the rest of the year.
Is there a way for us to send something out like that via email for folks so they can actually look at calendars and see what might work? And thinking about legislative session, whether we are meeting at all or whether we think about our first meeting right after session is over, and just kind of maybe wondering about maybe Krista, you and I and Dr. Levy connecting and maybe doing some of that thinking forward, and then sending an email out to the group, to the whole board. Does that?
Yeah, we can definitely work on that and find a tool that would help us get that information from board members, and then we can work with leadership and have that conversation to plan our next steps.
I don't know about you, but I'd be afraid to try to find a date. Looking at all these faces on the screen right now, it would be a frightening thing. So just thinking as we...
challenges. It is one of our greatest challenges for sure.
I know it is. But and again, and then maybe do some thinking. And I would say too, if anybody's got thoughts, or you know, you hang up tonight and something percolates and you got a great idea, send it Krista's way, because you know, I don't know, all I know is what I know and what I've sat in on the last few meetings. And so really just trying to create the space where we can do what we want to do and what we need to do, in a place in a way that doesn't make people feel like they're losing time or they're wasting their time. So anyway, anything else anyone has? It is 3:57 by my clock, and we're due off at 4. I would just say somebody who's been around since the first, we were at the Community Trade and Economic Development, and then moved to Department of Early Learning, and now are at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. There's been a lot of transition over the last 30 plus years, and we really are in a great space, and we really are doing some amazing work. Even though I know if you've been around for a while, sometimes you wonder. But as I go and I hear what other states are doing, folks before me, I know have made some incredible strides, and you know, just want to keep that forward momentum, as I know all of you do as well. So just really appreciate your time and your commitment to this group. And hopefully we can provide clarity together and get some good stuff done. So with that, I think you will hear via electronic email. If you are a celebratory in the holiday mode, have a great holiday. Rest and relax, and we will see you, hopefully some or all of you, during session in January. I know Senator Warnick will be sitting side by side, so we'll see you in Human Services. So Krista and staff, thanks so much for putting everything together and being with us today and keeping us on track. Appreciative of that.
Thank you.
Have a good holiday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.